If you enjoy daily light novel audiobooks, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. Chapter 391 Knockouts 3. There wasn't much distance between him and Alex. So, Takashi gave a relentless chase, trying his hardest to win the ball. Alex saw him coming. Yet, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he calmly approached the incoming Takashi as if he were inviting him with open arms. As impressive as Takashi's defense was, Hiro couldn't trust him fully to win the ball for them. If he somehow wins back the ball, that'd be for the better. But even if he didn't manage to, he couldn't care less. Right now, Takashi was no more than a decoy. Since the opposing fullback had made up a run from behind and they were distracted by the midfield trio of the opposing team, most of his team's players hadn't noticed his run. That is why none were on their guard against the incoming threat. But he had seen it coming. Yet he couldn't speak of it, or else he'd draw the attention of the opposing players. Then while rushing back, he made use of his skill hawk eyes. The view of the entire field came to his vision as he used his skill. Nobody was spared, be it his teammates or the opposing players. He could see them all. Previously, he had noticed the run of one of their fullback. But now as he used his skill, he could see their other fullback charging from the opposite flank. If not for his skill, he might have missed it. Thus, upon finding out this important piece of information, he couldn't help but feel grateful for having such a handy skill. Who'll he pass? Though he had found out their tactics, he still couldn't figure out precisely whom Alex was hinting toward. But it didn't matter whoever he chose. Since he had already figured out their tactics, now all he needed to do was to neutralize it. However, he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. So, he turned towards his nearest teammate for help, which happened to be Yutaka. Not the best option, still better than not having any option. While running past him, he mumbled briskly, "Rush to the left." He only dropped a hint since he didn't have any time for an explanation. Now, it was all up to Yutaka. If he doesn't get it, then they won't be able to stop the opposing team's build-up. But if he figures it out, then they might be able to turn the situation. Since the defense line of the opposing team right now was full of holes, if they could somehow win the ball back, they'd turn the tables on them. With a quick counterattack, they could catch the opposing players off guard. Yutaka heard something when Hiro passed him, but he couldn't tell exactly what he had heard. Left, he mumbled, try to recall what he had heard. But due to the heat of the moment and the noise in the background, no matter how hard he tried to recall, he couldn't recall. Though he couldn't recall the full sentence of Hiro, he still turned to the left. Having great vision, it didn't take him long to figure out what Hiro meant upon seeing the incoming fullback who was charging from the left flank. Immediately, he then darted towards the left flank, trying to intercept the incoming fullback. He wasn't confident of his defending, yet still, he could position himself before him to at least stall him. Unlike Hiro, who rushed furtively, Yutaka appeared rather flashy. Steadily approaching Takashi, Alex got past him with ease. Using his own momentum against himself, Alex performed a simple step over to get past him, making a fool out of him. Yet still, even after getting dribbled past, Takashi continued his pursuit. Immediately, he changed his direction and started pressing from behind. Maintaining constant pressure on Alex, he did everything in his power to win the ball. Takashi's relentless pressure did the trick as it disrupted the focus of Alex. Alongside searching for his teammates, he also had to deal with Takashi, which made it rather difficult for him to concentrate. Alex knew about his teammates' run, but still, he had to stall time for them to be useful. He couldn't just toss the ball to them. Sure, he had other options, but those were rather risky. And he only liked to make choices he was sure about, which is why, for a while, he kept on hogging the ball. Then finally, after a short while, he sensed an opportunity. Both the fullbacks of his team were exceptional runners and exceptional passers. And, having played alongside them, he knew that he could trust them. Once again, using Takashi's own momentum against himself, he easily sidestepped him. Then, he immediately shot a killer pass to the right flank. Noticing Yutaka, he didn't pass it to the left. Instead, he passed it to the right where seemingly nobody was present, until he saw the figure of Hiro emerging out of nowhere. For a split second upon noticing the figure of Hiro, his eyes widened in surprise and horror. Wasn't he rushing back? So, for where did he arrive? Alex's heart sank upon seeing him, and his face contorted in horror. But he couldn't afford to remain confused. He had to pull his shit together and defend. He was surprised, and so were many others present in the stadium. That interruption from Hiro sent chills to many, and it nearly got the entire stadium on their toes. Interrupting the pass midway, he pushed upfield without losing momentum. Under the spell of the skill lightning steps, currently, he had no match on the field, and the ones who could match him were both dispositioned. It was unlikely they could catch up to him. Then with a burst of speed, he charged. Opposing players came rushing toward him, attempting to stop him from advancing. Yet with swift and nimble steps, he got past them with ease. Witnessing the march of Hiro, Simon started feeling a bit tense. If their defenders, too, couldn't stop him, then he'd have to face this monster of a man in a one-on-one battle. Exploiting the gaps in the defense of the opposing team, Hiro charged from the flanks. And, in no time, he found himself in front of the penalty box of the opposing team. Chapter 392, Knockouts 4. Simon's mind raced with thoughts as he thought of countless scenarios. In front of him, Hiro was about to breach their last line of defense. Now, what was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to wait for him? Or was he supposed to rush on him to intercept him? There was only so much he could do in such a situation. The last line of defense fell as Hiro swiftly got past the final defender and started cutting inside at a threatening pace. Now, nobody could possibly obstruct him. Perspiration trickled down his forehead like a monsoon downpour as he closed into the opposing team's penalty box. His breathing was a little hurried, and his focus was unwavering. Right now, he could vividly feel his heart pounding. The noise around him was subsiding with each passing moment. Taking a quick glance at the post, he locked eyes with the opposing keeper. Those set of calm eyes were as deep as the ocean, mysterious and unpredictable. A true definition of a player of high caliber, Simon seemed extremely calm even in the face of danger. But even so, he couldn't afford to act impressed by Simon's qualities. After all, that much was expected of him, since he was chosen as the keeper of such an elite team. Then he cast a quick glance behind him to see if anyone from the opposing team was pursuing him. He also wanted to find out the position of his teammates. Who knows, they might be right beside him, and he might miss their presence because he was too absorbed in what was in front of him. At all times, he needed to keep his perspective broad so that he wouldn't miss opportunities. The more choice, the better. But he couldn't locate any of his teammates. They were all lagging far behind him, and if he waited for them, he'd miss the opportunity at hand. Unable to locate any of his teammates, Hiro then came to a quick decision that it'd be better for him to take charge. It'd be better to complete the task he had initiated by himself than wait for anyone else to do it. The post was in front of him, and he had the ball on his feet. He'll probably need to cut inside to find a suitable angle. Simon racked his mind. Wait. No, I shouldn't be quick to judge. After all, he's bipedal, so his positioning wouldn't matter to him much. But I can still limit his shooting angle. In just a quick second, he thought of countless measures to limit Hiro. The pressure on him was great, yet he still kept on racking his mind as if he had nothing to worry about. His ability to think and analyze, even during dreadful moments, was what set him apart from other mediocre players. It wasn't his athletic abilities, nor was his reflex that set him apart from his counterparts. But his ability to think and predict accurately based on the clues present in hand is what set him apart from his counterparts. Finally, after thinking for a while, he started moving. However, right now, he wasn't the only player with such an incredible ability present on the field. Hiro too possessed this ability. The ability to make quick decisions. The ability to improvise at the nick of time. Despite catching the whiff of Simon's intentions, Hiro played along with it. Simon was trying to lead him away from the post. Yet, instead of trying to counter him, he purposely moved as per Simon's wishes. Having entered the penalty box, the skill knight in the area was in effect, and right now his attacking stats had received a slight boost due to it. Not only was he more agile than before, but his senses were also greatly enhanced. Despite that, he couldn't see as many opportunities as usual. This really showcased Simon's potential. He wasn't easy to trifle with. Almost the entire audience held their breath as they kept their eyes fixated on the field. A fierce battle was unfolding on the pitch. A mix of trepidation and excitement was evident in the eyes of the Japanese supporters. Successfully managing to lead Hiro to his desired destination, Simon was quite happy about it. His confidence right now was at its peak. "You're trapped. Now let's finish it," he thought as he took a few quick steps to close in the distance further and leap towards Hiro. All along, he had the impression that he had outsmarted Hiro. But how wrong was he to think so? If only he could see glimpses of the future, would he be able to see his shortcomings? Slightly lifting the corner of his lips, Hiro smiled wryly. The moment he had been anticipating for a while finally presented itself before him. His eyes flashed with a sense of gratification. Then, he performed a quick sidestep at the nick of time, barely avoiding Simon. Though he managed to keep the ball away from the clutch of Simon, he didn't avoid Simon. Instead, he purposely slowed down his movements. He could easily avoid Simon, but he didn't want to avoid him. Yet, he couldn't be open about his intentions, too. He had to make it seem as if he was trying to avoid him and go for the goal. And he needed to make it believable. If he wanted, he could have scored long ago. He didn't need to go through all these troubles. But his real intention wasn't the goal. His real intention was to rile up Simon and the other players of the opposing team. They could easily return the goal. But mental distress, how would they get rid of it immediately? Sure, they needed this goal. But the opposing team was way too calm to face the whole 90 minutes. They needed some sort of distress in the opposing team for them to make accidental mistakes. His teammates were running out of gas. But the opposing team, they were still as energetic as ever. In the long run, they'd lose for sure if it continued. So to have a better chance of winning, he purposely went to find trouble with them. Beep. Chapter 396. Beep. The referee sounded his whistle as he witnessed the fall of Hiro. That whistle acted as a trigger, as no sooner had it resounded in the stadium than a huge uproar took place in the stadium. Appearing rather disappointed and frustrated, people started complaining in large numbers, and a commotion took place in the stadium. Simon had badly crashed against Hiro. Though it wasn't his intention to crash, nonetheless the fact remained true that he had crashed against Hiro. And no matter how one looked at it, the fact remained undeniable that it was foul. "Take your card out, ref." "Diving, it's diving, ref." Supporters of both sides stood firm beside their team as they tried to defend their players. Nobody was willing to back down, and soon a heated debate took place in the stands. Players of both teams rushed toward the scene, each appearing extremely riled up. The importance of this opportunity was written visibly on the faces of the Japanese players. While at the same time, the opposing players weren't willing to hand over a penalty either. What's a keeper supposed to do midway? Magically change direction to avoid making contact with the attacker? A collision was bound to take place in a close clash between a keeper and an attacker. So what's the fuss about it? Grabbing his ankles as if he had been hurt badly, Hiro remained immobile on the ground, moaning in pain. Arg, arg. He could audibly hear the conflict taking place around him. Yet, he couldn't afford to turn his head or stop his cries. His acting had to remain flawless for it to convince the referee to search his pockets. Are they trying to injure our teammate? They're playing aggressively, ref. How's that a foul? He's faking his injury, ref. It's a dive, ref. Players of both teams were putting a lot of pressure on the referee, each pleading for the innocence of their teammates. A heated debate was taking place on the field. Yet, somehow no sort of physical resistance had taken place. Simon himself was pleading his innocence alongside his teammates. He knew that he was in a pinch. Even if he pretended to act injured, there was almost a 90% chance that the decision wouldn't be in his favor. He hadn't touched the ball. If only he'd have touched the ball, it wouldn't have come to this. And the situation wouldn't be this ugly. Penalty was guaranteed for sure. And Simon, being on the receiving end, knew well about it. Then why was he pleading so desperately if he knew that the odds were stacked against him? The answer, however, was rather simple. He wanted to avoid the card. Penalty wasn't his concern, but the card was. Receiving a card at this point would be detrimental to his team. In the worst-case scenario, if he received a red card, then the game might as well be over even before the full time. Even a yellow card would greatly affect his team's morale. Not only that, he'd have to play even more safely. And who knows what kind of mistakes it would lead to if he started playing safely. As a keeper, he had to play daringly. But if he received a booking, then he'd have to become even more conscious of his actions. He'd lose the freedom to play daringly, as he'd get shackled by the fear of receiving another card. Thus, even though he couldn't change the decision of the referee, he'd have to somehow convince him not to book him. But the worst-case scenario unfolded despite his relentless attempt to persuade the referee. Even after so much pleading, the referee still reached out for his pocket. The supporters of the opposing team weren't happy to see this sight. Disgruntled, they were extremely furious at the referee for his decision. Now, one would expect the supporters of Japan to be happy about it. And they were happy. Most of them were. But few were still dissatisfied with the referee's decision. It should have been a straight red, ref. Yeah, send him off. The card that the referee brought out wasn't to their liking. They wanted him to bring out a red card instead of a yellow card for the rough tackle on their star players. However, Hiro was satisfied with the outcome. It wasn't his intention to get him booked. All he wanted was to stir the emotions of the opposing players. But his actions surprisingly yielded a great harvest. Should I stop pretending now? He thought while still continuing his act. The commotion around him wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. So, he was wondering when he could finally stop his act. After all, he wasn't a great actor to begin with. And, due to that, he feared getting found out if he continued this act incessantly. Yutaka had remained by his side all along with his brows knitted into a frown. And even he hadn't found out Hiro's acting. Watching his friend writhing in agony, he was truly worried about him. And the concern was evident on his darkened face. Literally, he was on the verge of tearing. Should we send our medical staff? Manager Haruki asked concernedly. Yes, let's send them. He really appears to be in quite a lot of pain. Most of the coaching staff unanimously agreed with Manager Haruki's suggestion. However, Kazan remained silent as usual. After getting the approval of his coaching staff, Manager Haruki was about to send in the medical staff to treat Hiro. But before he could speak, he was interrupted by Kazan. No, let's wait. But why? Manager Haruki couldn't help but feel perplexed by Kazan's disagreement. Why would he want to risk the injury of such an important player? What if he's really injured? Don't you find it quite strange? Kazan asked. What's so strange about it? What are you talking about? Haruki couldn't understand the meaning behind his question. He had a lot of opportunities to score. But why did he decide to close in? Kazan reasoned. Now that he mentioned about it, he couldn't help but wonder. Sure, the shooting angle was somewhat tight for him. But why did he decide to close in? After all, his long-range shoots were equally impressive. Just when he was contemplating, he saw Hiro rising on the field. If he was really injured, he wouldn't have gotten up, would he? For some reason, upon seeing him stand up, he couldn't help but smile. Just from where did you learn such flawless acting? Then, after everybody dispersed, Hiro stood before the ball, preparing to take the penalty. Chapter 394 Nokut 6. Though the commotion around him had subsided to a certain extent, it was still rather noisy around him. While standing upright before the ball, he could audibly hear the disagreement of the opposing fans. The opposing fans were still not dissatisfied with the referee's decision. At the same time, he could also hear the desperation of his supporters. He had won them the penalty, but if he couldn't convert it, then it wouldn't amount to anything. That's why most of them were quite worried at the moment. Only if they knew that Hiro possessed an absolute skill that had allowed him to score without fail, they might not have been as tensed as they were right now. Letting out a mouth full of turbid air, he then fixated his eyes on the ball. His focus was unbreakable, his determination ironclad. At this moment, suddenly it felt as if the air around him had started getting heavy. Where's he going to shoot? Since Hiro wasn't looking his way, he couldn't be sure of it. If only he could track his eyes, he might have been able to tell where he was going to shoot. But what was he supposed to do when he didn't even shoot a glance at the post? Now, he could only rely on his intuition. Beep! The referee's whistle cut through the tension. Hiro began his run up, every movement deliberate and measured. Just as his foot was about to strike the ball, his eyes flashed with an eerie sharpness, the only moment he glanced at the post. Bam! The ball soared, cutting through the air with precision and power, barely allowing the opposing keeper any opportunity to react. Nonetheless, Simon dived in an attempt to save the ball despite not being able to see where it was headed. Yet, somehow he managed to dive in the right direction. But the speed at which the ball was moving was just too fast that even though he reacted correctly, he still failed to save it. The ball effortlessly glided inside the post, unimpeded. Gulal! At once, a euphoric roar erupted forth in the stadium as supporters of Japan started to celebrate. Cheers from Japanese supporters surged like a tidal wave, drowning out the frustrated groans of the opposing fans. The noise was deafening, a symphony of joy and relief. For a moment, Hiro stood still at his place, firmly staring at the post ahead, letting the rush of victory wash over him. While he remained still at his place, his teammates swarmed him, clapping him on the back and ruffling his hair. They celebrated the moment, appearing extremely elated. Letting himself loose, he too started celebrating the goal alongside his teammates. Glancing at the stands, he could vividly see the jubilant faces of the supporters of Japan, and it only acted as a catalyst to his celebratory spirit, fueling him to enjoy this moment to its fullest. For a while, the celebration resumed. Then after that, they all started heading back to their position to resume the match. As usual, the commentator was full of praise. Then as they started regrouping, Hiro's thought briefly drifted to the next challenge. They had taken the lead, but the game was still far from being over. There was still more than enough time to turn the tide of the game. However, the damage had already been done. The opposing team had to be more careful about their approach from now on. Still, neither he nor his teammates could afford to get cocky. After all, they weren't playing against any riff-raff team. They were playing against an extremely formidable team, a team consisting of players of elite mentality and talent. But, for now, he could at least enjoy the feeling of celebration for a brief moment. Beep! Immediately as he heard the shrill sound of the referee's whistle, he snapped back to reality. Recomposing himself, he fixated his eyes in front of him. The opposing team kicked off. Despite the commotion, they appeared unaffected. It was almost as if nothing had taken place in the field a moment ago. Neither did they appear riled up, nor they appeared discouraged. With minutes left on the clock for the end of the first half, the opposing team tried their best to level the score. Yet, before they managed to level the score, the referee blew his whistle, announcing the end of the first half. Just like this, the first half came to an end with them taking the lead. Almost every single one of Hiro's teammates heaved a collective sigh of relief upon hearing the halftime whistle. They couldn't be more glad about the timing. Utterly exhausted from running all over the field, they had drained themselves out. Sure, they had managed to take the lead, but it still hadn't lifted the exhaustion. They needed a much-needed rest to recuperate. And now they could do just that. They could finally rest. Thus, every single one of them was glad to hear the halftime whistle. After the halftime whistle, everybody slowly marched towards the tunnel, while the fans too got out of their seat to relieve themselves and get something to eat. The stadium provided a wide variety of snacks they could enjoy while watching the match. And, looking at the movement of the people in the stands, it appeared that many weren't willing to miss out on the selection of snacks the venue accommodated. As people walked out of their seats, the stadium started becoming empty. And the sound of the music played on the speaker, due to the absence of the people, appeared louder than before. While making his way into the tunnel, Hiro received a lot of stares from both the fans and the players of the opposing team. He could vividly feel the hostility behind those stares. Yet, he kept a stoic face, appearing as if he wasn't even concerned about those hostile gazes. Well, I knew this was coming, but it's a lot more than my initial expectations. Initially, after pulling off that stunt, he had expected some kind of negative reaction from the opposing fans and players. But even he hadn't expected that he'd piss off the entire fan base. Chapter 395, Knockout 7. With just one move, he had managed to antagonize the entire opposing fan base. If it were any player other than him on the receiving end of those hostile gazes, they might have a mental breakdown by now. However, he didn't appear to be bothered in the slightest. Seems like you won't be able to sleep well today. Making his way to Hiro, Shun joked. If we win this game, not even a nightmare will prevent me from having a deep sleep, let alone their hostility, Hiro responded calmly. Clap, clap, clap. He applauded Hiro, shooting a gaze full of admiration. Even when faced with such hostility, how could he remain so calm? Shun couldn't help but applaud Hiro's unwavering mentality. Well said, he spoke as he walked into the tunnel alongside Hiro. They then disappeared into the tunnel. However, he didn't receive any break even after leaving the pitch. He continued to receive hostile gazes from the players of the opposing team. But among those hostile gazes, one was filled with admiration. Just how could you remain so calm? Alex couldn't help but wonder about the secret that allowed Hiro to remain so calm in such a dire moment. And only after they went their separate ways did he have some peace of mind. Even he couldn't deny that it felt quite relaxing to not be the target of those hostile gazes. Huff! Hiro heaved a sigh of relief. As if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders, he felt quite lighter after separating from the opposing players. Welcome back, folks. It's halftime here at the stadium, and what an intense first half we've witnessed. The score is level at 1-1, and both teams have shown remarkable spirit. Let's break down the action so far. What are your thoughts on the game, Mike? It's been a fascinating first half. Both sides came out with a lot of energy. The Japanese team started strong, and that penalty goal by Hiro was executed with such precision and calm under pressure. He's truly shown his skill and why he's such a vital player for his team. While the commentators were discussing the match, players emerged out of the tunnel for the second half. The stadium had been nothing but noisy till now. Yet still, when they emerged out of the tunnel, it became even more noisy. Filled with the joyous chants of the fans, it lit up. The euphoria from Hiro's goal was still lingering among the Japanese supporters, and they were rather excited for the second half. While at the same time, the opposing fans were filled with anticipation and rage. From the tone of their voice and their gestures, it was evident that they hadn't forgiven Hiro for what he had done in the first half. They were thirsty for revenge. Truly, at this moment, Hiro felt like he wasn't in a stadium, but in a coliseum filled with an audience that wanted to see him dead. Seems like they don't want to see David beating Goliath. Hiro couldn't help but sneer at the gestures of the opposing fans. They were the underdogs. Yet even so, they were expected to win fair and square. Aren't they being just narrow-minded? Well, what can we expect? It's totally different when it comes to international games. Patriotism reigned supreme after all. Hiro shook his head submissively. Then he diverted his gaze back to the field from the stands. He had a much greater concern ahead of him. Observing the state of the opposing players, he could faintly feel that something had changed. Sure, after that short break, they'd be better rested. So, they'd appear slightly different. But his hunches told him that it wasn't only that. It wasn't just that they appeared well rested, but something about them was different. The look in the eyes of the opposing players had changed. They appeared more sharper and determined than ever. Were they now going to unleash their full potential? As they assumed their position to kickstart the second half, it felt like he was preparing to enter a battlefield. His enemies were right in front of him, dressed in red jerseys, raring to go. However, he wasn't all alone. Beside him were his teammates who were just as ready as him to face this situation. Beep! The second half resumed with the referee's whistle. Intensity soared on the field as players of both teams pressed aggressively. None of them were willing to spare any effort as they all gave their all. The Japanese team pushed forward, trying to maintain their lead and possibly double their lead. But the opposition was simply relentless. They gave them no opportunity. Instead, they tested their defense over and over with their coordinated attacks. And soon they were forced into defense. Let alone moving the ball forward, even winning back the ball became a challenge to them. It felt like it wasn't the same team from the first half they were facing at the moment. Upon seeing this turn of events, opposing fans became extremely exhilarated. Finally, the match was playing as they had envisioned. Just like how their team had dominated previous matches, once again they were dominating the ball possession and the entirety of the match. Hiro and his teammates struggled to endure the relentless press from the opposing players. Yet, somehow they managed to defend their lead. However, despite their best efforts, cracks started to emerge in their formation, and the opposing players often exploited these cracks, making their way into their penalty box. It put a huge burden on Shun as he had to make countless extraordinary saves to keep them in the match. Let alone scoring another goal, even defending their sole lead started becoming difficult for them. The absence of Akutsu was starting to get visible too. The opposing players were often breaching their defense from the center. In the 71st minute of the match, Alex sent a brilliant through pass right in the middle. Sato, who had replaced Akutsu, slid down to interrupt the pass, but failed to do so. Chapter 3, 96 Knockouts 8. The failure of Sato to stop the ball disappointed their supporters, while at the same time, it made the opposing fans extremely ecstatic. Squinching their eyes, they looked at the ball with horror. They could vividly feel their heart palpitating, yet couldn't do anything about it. At this threatening moment, the Japanese supporters could only turn to the invisible forces for help, and as such some of them started praying. Meanwhile, the cheers of the opposing fans intensified, sending shockwaves throughout the stadium. It was as if they wanted to let the players know that they were rooting for them, even at the heat of the moment. If only Sato had timed his tackle well, he might have been able to reach the ball. But now that he left a massive hole in the defense due to his mistake, it was going to cost him a lot. The opposing striker, who was sprinting toward the ball with alarming speed, wasn't going to let go of this golden opportunity. For sure, he'd punish them for their mistake. Even when faced with such a threatening situation, Shun reacted quickly as he made a quick decision to go for the ball. Yet still, despite his best efforts, he couldn't reach the ball before the incoming opposing striker. Competing against a speedy striker in terms of speed was a foolish decision, and he was well aware of it. Even so, he couldn't sit still with his arms folded, could he? He had to do everything he could, and he did it without any hesitation. Shun knew well that he wouldn't be able to reach the ball before him. But what if he were to slide down with his legs extended? He could reduce the gap and possibly reach the ball before him too. Though he executed his thoughts well, he still didn't manage to get the ball. Instead, he brought the opposing striker down with his tackle. Aware of the weight of his actions, his heart started racing. He knew what was coming. Just like the opposing keeper, he was going to get booked, wasn't he? Immediately, the sound of the whistle sounded. But so did the celebratory chants of the opposing fans. Goal! The entire stadium buzzed with the feeling of euphoria as opposing fans celebrated the equalizer. At the nick of the moment, when he was about to make contact with him, the opposing striker released the ball at the empty post. But in doing so, he couldn't avoid the collision. Although he managed to guide the ball to its destination, he couldn't avoid Shun's tackle, which led to the present situation. Slowly, Shun turned around with fear in his heart. But as he turned around, he noticed that the opposing striker whom he had tackled was already on his way to celebrate his goal. That sight relieved him a little. He was glad to find that he hadn't injured his opponent. But then again, the feeling of disappointment washed over him. Gushing at him like the tidal wave of a tsunami, a bitter feeling struck him, leaving him utterly disappointed in himself. Why was he so relieved? Shouldn't he be feeling disappointed instead? He had let his team down, but here he was glad to find out the state of the opposing player instead. The priority should be his team. Even though the opposing striker seemed totally fine, that didn't mean that the referee was going to ignore his actions. He had brought him down, and it was a dangerous tackle nonetheless. So, he should at least receive a warning for his actions. Making his way toward him, while the opposing players were celebrating their goal, The referee left him a warning for his actions, rubbing salt in his wound. It was already painful for him, but now he had to listen to his warning too. Nonetheless, he tucked his wounded pride and silently listened to his warning. Though he couldn't tell what he was talking about, he could tell that he was asking him to play a little less aggressively. The opposing team's celebration lasted for a while. Unable to bear the loud voices of the opposing fans, many supporters of Japan covered their ears. At the same time, many chose to express their frustration by yelling at the players. Just to let in the team, sub him out. Most of the fans were quite tolerant and supportive, but some were quite toxic. They are right. Maybe I should just leave. With a darkened face devoid of any emotions, Sato, who had cost him this goal, was doubting his own abilities, blaming himself for the fault. His will to play was starting to fade, and his confidence was starting to hit rock bottom. If it continued, he'd be no more than a lifeless zombie walking on the field. Thud! While he was lost in self-doubt, suddenly he felt a light smack on his back. Who could it be? Do they want to complain? Or perhaps they share the same sentiment as the crowd. Several thoughts popped one after the other as he nervously darted his gaze behind to look at the person. Fear gripped his heart, and as he turned around, he found Hiro. It was Hiro who had struck him. Immediately upon seeing his face, he thought of apologizing. Sure. But before he could finish his sentence, he got interjected. It's not your fault. Don't jest it. It's not my fault. What was he trying to say? How is it not my fault? No matter how you look at it, if I had prevented the ball from going through, we wouldn't have conceded. Hiro was trying to console him, but he wasn't in a state to be consoled. The criticism of the fans had already gone to his head. So how could he act fine? Even so, he couldn't bring himself to argue. Terrified, he could only nod his head. Though he was nodding his head as if he had understood what he was trying to convey, he could still see the guilt in his eyes. Chapter 3, 97 Knockouts 9. Chapter 3, 97 Knockouts 9. It wasn't only him who was affected by this goal. There were others too. In particular, Shun should be the most devastated. But now, was he going to leave him? Sure, he appeared to be a lost cause, a person beyond saving. But still, he couldn't leave him now, could he? Though not out of pity, he decided to stick by his side and try to console him. We all make mistakes now and then, but if we let it bother us, then we won't be able to advance. So, learn from your mistakes, Sato. Don't let it hinder you, Hiro said, trying to alleviate his worries and guilt. He wasn't good with words, so it was the best he could come up with at the moment. Now, it was all up to Sato how he wished to interpret it. Hiro hardly knew anything about him, and he wasn't anyone special either. From what he had found, he was a player who could barely make it to the professional stage. So, why would he bother trying to cheer him up? There were a lot of players who could replace him. His stats were mediocre, and he didn't possess anything special either. One could also say that he was an average player with no specialty. So, why was he going out of his way to cheer him? The reason behind it was quite selfish. He was trying to cheer him because he was their best option at the moment. Then while trying to cheer him, he noticed some movement in the substitution box. Akutsu was leaving his seat. It meant that he was now going to warm up. That sight relieved him. Since Akutsu was going to come in, now why should he bother trying to cheer up Sato? Cheer up, you'll get more opportunities. Saying so, he was about to walk away. But as he prepared to walk away, Sato's gloomy expression triggered a dormant memory. That look on his face was exactly the same as his when he was told by everyone that he'd do better in the next game, and he shouldn't overthink his mistakes. Had the fame got his head? Or had he started becoming arrogant now that he could play better? If not for the system, would he even be standing here? Sato, who had made it this far without the help of any cheat, how could he compare to someone like him? Previously, he hadn't made it to the team, but Sato might have made it. Since he couldn't recall his name, he couldn't tell. But there's a possibility that he might have made it to the team even in his previous life. Recalling those memories of the past, he turned around. Seeing him turn around, Sato felt as if his expression wasn't convincing enough. So, he spoke hurriedly, trying to get on his good side. I get it. I'll play more cautiously from now on. Hiro could vividly see the nervousness that Sato had tried so hard to mask. Sato was trying his hardest to make him believe that he was all right now. But, despite his best efforts, he could tell that it still troubled him. So, unlike the previous times when Hiro's attempts at consolation had been tinged with selfish motives, this time he genuinely wanted to lift Sato's spirits. He then gently placed his hands atop his shoulder. Softening his tone, he spoke with genuine empathy. I know it's not easy to shake this feeling, Sato, and you might even be doubting yourself right now. For a while, he had been trying to avoid locking eyes with Hiro, but upon hearing those words of comfort, he jolted his eye toward Hiro. Locking eyes with Hiro, he noticed how gentle and caring he appeared at the moment. Those gazes of Hiro were full of concern. Why was he trying so hard to avoid those gentle gazes all along? A feeling of guilt washed over him as he realized how idiotic he had been up till now. Previously, when Hiro had tried to console him, he had even belittled him by thinking that it was easy for him to say because he was talented. But now that he met gazes with him, he could feel his genuine intentions. He was truly concerned about him. His eyes sparkled as a flicker of hope and forgiveness mingled within them. At the same time, an intense feeling of apology rose within him. But before he could bring himself to speak, Hiro cut him short. He wasn't done yet. Hiro continued, his voice steady and reassuring as before. But remember, every player goes through this. The important thing is to learn and grow from it. Mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Indeed, as mentioned by him, everyone makes mistakes. Even the best players aren't spared. But unlike others, they learn from their mistakes. And that's what makes them the best. Realization struck him. Sato then nodded slowly. Thanks, Hiro. I just don't want to let the team down. You won't, Hiro assured him, tightening the grip on his shoulder. We're all in this together. Trust in your abilities and in your teammates. Play your game, and everything else will follow. Right now, he wasn't only saying those words to Sato, but to himself as well. Instead of you'll do better in another game, or some words without feelings, he wanted someone to say those words to him in the past. He wanted someone to believe in him. When there's someone to believe in you, you can overcome any obstacles, such as the power of belief. It could transform a common man into someone special. Probably his belief in the system had brought him this far as well. It wasn't that he lacked potential, but sometimes even the mightiest of the mountains crumbles under the pressure of the storm. Even a mentally strong person can develop self-doubt if put under pressure for long. And at that time, having someone to believe in them can give them the much-needed strength. A tentative smile appeared on Sato's face, a sign that Hiro's words had struck the chord. Chapter 398 Knockouts X. Hiro then smiled and left. He still had much to do. After all, Sato wasn't the only person who needed a helping hand. There were others too who appeared to be in dire need of a helping hand. Pausing, he then turned around to look at Sato. His face had lightened up and his eyes were glowing with a renewed determination. Those subtle clues were enough to tell him that he had managed to help him. But upon seeing those determined gazes, he started feeling a little heavy. When he had finally managed to overcome his ordeal, he was now going to get subbed. You'll get more chances. Hang in there. Hiro could only offer his well wishes to him. Sure, it might not be him, but for some reason, Hiro could tell with certainty that he was going to be subbed off. Even after the end of the celebration, the stadium continued to buzz with anticipation. The air was thick with tension and excitement, and the pressure on them was astronomical now that they had blown their lead away. The only way out of this situation was to score, and for sure it wasn't going to be easy. It was akin to snatching meat from a lion's mouth. As Hiro took his position, he squinched his eyes to look at the post of the opposing team. Previously, it didn't seem so far. Yet now, it appeared quite distant all of a sudden. Looking at the post made him wonder, has it always been so far? The post appeared quite far, but he couldn't afford to weigh him down. Trying to uplift his spirits, he then let out a mouth full of turbid air. If it's far then, I just have to run more. Afterward, he retracted his gaze and swept it around him. Sweeping his gaze around him, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't only him who was high in spirits. Currently, his teammates too share the same resolve, and He could vividly see it in their expressions. That's right, what's there to worry about? It's not like it was the first time they were facing a formidable team. They had faced adversity before, and they would do so again. Beep! The referee's whistle pierced the air, signaling the continuation of the match. The game resumed with ferocious intensity, each side pushing to gain the upper hand. Though the opposing side came at them even more ferociously, they fought back valiantly. Responding offense to the offense, they fought back as that recent failure proved to be a wake-up call for them. Their passes became even more fluid and their synchronization started to improve. It seemed that almost everyone on the team had realized that if they didn't give their all, they might have to bid farewell to the tournament. And almost none of them wished to exit the tournament. Rallying alongside his teammates, Hiro rushed up front. With swift 1-2 passes and combination plays, he steadily advanced, creating a dangerous scenario for the opposing team. Just like a skilled composer connecting different notes to create a beautiful symphony, he connected his teammates to create an impressive build-up. It greatly worried the opposing players as some of them started panicking a little. They had already breached their midfield and now were on their way to the defense. What were they supposed to do? Focus all their attention on the person responsible or spread out to cover a greater distance? Seed of confusion started to sprout within the hearts of many as they struggled to decide. One wrong move could potentially blow up the entire game, as there wasn't much time left on the clock. The clock was ticking steadily. Then before they could even decide, Hiro appeared before them. But he wasn't all alone. Alongside him were his teammates. 6 of them in total. Compared to their numbers, they paled in comparison. The entirety of their offensive players were involved in this attack. And from the flank, more were coming for reinforcement, while their teammates were scattered all over the field. Now, it was all up to the defense to stop their frontal attack. From behind, Simon was shouting instructions. Having a better view of the field, he could see something they might have potentially missed. So, they needed to trust his instructions. Following the instructions of Simon, they then stuck close to each other. Close but not so close. After all, they needed to watch out for the flanks too. Somewhere in their heart, most of the opposing defenders could assume that it'd be Hiro who'd take the strike in the end. But it was only an assumption after all. So, they couldn't move based on their assumption either. It's not like that opposing team lacked quality players besides Hiro. There were still some who could threaten their peace. So, they couldn't afford to become short-sighted. At this moment, while almost all of his teammates were falling back, Alex didn't appear to be in any kind of hurry. Unlike his teammates who appeared to be in a state of panic, he seemed unusually calm. And, due to the heat of the moment, none noticed his calmness or his actions. It was almost as if he had disappeared from the pitch. Was there some kind of meaning behind his lackluster actions? Or was he tired? It was really hard to figure out what was going on in his mind. Then with a burst of speed while playing swift 1-2 passes with his teammates, Hiro managed to breach the defense line of the opposing team. Though he managed to get past the opposing defenders, he didn't manage to find a lot of space to operate, which led him to decide to shoot immediately. Right now, he was just at the edge of the penalty box. He could vividly see the entire post right in front of him. The previously distant post now was so close to him, just within his reach. But time was pressing on him, and he had to hurry, or else he'll lose this opportunity, as opposing fullbacks were just inches away from him. Rushing him from both sides, they were seconds away from reaching him. Fireball shot. Chapter 3, 99 Knockouts 11. Pinpointing a location, he struck the ball right from the edge of the box. Almost simultaneously, both opposing fullbacks who were closing on him lunged to intercept, their bodies a blur of desperate motion. However, both of them fell short as neither managed to land a touch on the ball. They simply couldn't time their intervention, and the ball zipped past their outstretched legs. Gliding past the legs of the opposing fullbacks, the ball flew straight toward the post at an incredible speed, uninterrupted. While the ball rushed toward him, Simon bided his time as he patiently awaited for the perfect timing to act. Then he took a few steps before launching toward the direction where the ball was headed. He could accurately predict the direction of the ball. Almost the entirety of the stadium had gone silent at the moment. Right at this moment, Alex, who was slowly withdrawing, felt a tingling sensation rising within him. For some inexplicable reason, his instinct screamed for him to act. Then he abruptly changed his direction and dashed toward the opposing post. The ball curved through the air, closing the distance to the goal with every heartbeat. Simon's outstretched fingers brushed the ball, but the momentum was too strong. It glanced off his gloves, altering its path, ricocheting into the pole. Thud! The ball produced a ringing sound as it hit the ball and bounced back. Simon managed to keep the ball away. The danger, however, continued to lurk. Luckily, however, as it bounced away, it found his teammate, and Simon couldn't be more glad about it. Seeing the turn of events, a subtle smile blossomed on Simon's face. Immediately as the ball descended towards him, he cleared it away. While still levitating in the air, he kicked it and sent it flying behind him. The ball then soared high in the sky. Upon seeing this scene, many Japanese players felt their hearts palpitating. More than half of them were present in the opposing half, and their defense at the moment was wide open. If any opposing player were to take advantage of it, they might not even be able to react, let alone prevent it. Trouble was brewing up front, and it had left them all terrified. But when they finally noticed Alex, it made their hearts shudder. What was he doing there? When did he reach there? They couldn't help questioning as they noticed the figure of Alex sprinting in their half. Luckily, most of their defenders had stayed behind, and they could only put their trust in them. Now, it was all up to them to stop him. They knew that they wouldn't reach him in time. Yet still, they couldn't afford to sit behind. So, immediately they began retreating. The moment that defender had cleared the ball away, Hiro had started retreating, and now he was way ahead of any of his teammates who until a moment ago were just behind him. When did he? Simon thought as he picked himself up, astonished. As the ball descended steadily, Alex gently took control of it while still maintaining his pace. He barely slowed down for a mere second while trapping the ball. Then again, he immediately tapped into his zone as he accelerated with the ball. Soon, though, he found himself face to face against Sato. Swaying his body, he tried to trick him with a body feint, but failed to do so. Sato stuck to him like a parasite. While Sato kept Alex occupied, Hiro steadily closed in the distance between him and Alex. Now, all he required was a few more seconds to reach him. If only Sato could keep him occupied for a little longer, he'd be able to gang up on Alex. Seeing the speed at which Hiro was moving, many people were left astonished. Just only a moment ago, he was at the forefront, and now he had made it all the way back while most of his teammates were still tailing him. Just how fast can he get? But before Hiro could make it to Alex, Sato got beaten. He could no longer keep Alex in check. Persistence could only bring him so far. The time he had brought was his limit. Mimicking his training drills, Alex finally got past Sato. Yet, it didn't make him happy. Instead, he bitterly clicked his tongue as he advanced. T-Sage. He wasted a lot of precious time on Sato, and he couldn't help but feel irritated about it. He shouldn't be struggling. Yet for some reason, he struggled to get past a single defender. He couldn't be more disappointed in himself. But it wasn't the time to let out his feelings. He could reflect on his mistakes after the match. Now, he had a much bigger concern, a much bigger responsibility in front of him. After getting past Sato, it didn't take him a lot to get past the other defender. In the blink of an eye, he got past the last remaining defender of the Japanese team. It greatly worried the Japanese supporters as they held their breath in exasperation. Alex was right in front of their post, and he only had a keeper to beat. If he scored this goal, it might very well plunge their hope of advancement. Despite his best efforts, Hiro could no longer reach Alex. Even so, he wasn't willing to admit defeat. Nonetheless, he continued to chase. After all, who knows, Shun might somehow bring him down. Almost every supporter of Japan put their trust in Shun. Some locked their fingers and started praying desperately for a miracle to occur. Responding to the demand of the situation, Shun left his post and rushed toward Alex. But he couldn't afford to be careless. While leaving his post, he had to be concise of his post too. If he were moved too far, Alex might chip the ball above his head, and he wouldn't be able to do anything. As much as it pressured Shun, the pressure on Alex was huge as well. If he missed this opportunity, Who knows what kind of negative reaction he would receive? For sure, he'd incur the wrath of the entire fanbase. He had to convert it under any circumstances. Chapter 400 Knockouts 12. Carrying the hopes of thousands of supporters, Alex steadily approached the opposing box. While at the same time, Shun confronted him in a one-on-one duel. The intensity rose in the field as thousands of eyes converged on the two of them, and suddenly an eerie calm swallowed the entire stadium. Fearlessly, Alex then closed into Shun without ever losing his momentum. Then he swerved to the right. Shun followed, launching him onto Alex's feet. Alex, however, chipped the ball over Shun's outstretched hands and avoided his reach. Then he himself jumped over Shun to avoid getting tackled by Shun. Bam! Alex struck the ball cleanly, sending it hurtling toward the empty post. Goal! The stadium erupted in a cacophony of sound. Cheers and groans mingled in a whirlwind of emotions. The Spanish supporters exploded joyfully, their triumphant cries echoing through the stands. While at the same time, a crushing silence fell over Hiro's team. Many of his teammates buried their faces in their chests as they ceased their chase. It was too late for them to chase now. The damage had been done. Hiro, who had been desperately chasing after Alex, slowed down as well. Finally, he then came to an abrupt pause. There was nothing more he could do. The opposing players, on the other hand, were running amok on the field. Alex was buried under the bodies of his teammates who had come to celebrate the moment with him. Seeing them in such a jubilant mood, one could hardly differentiate their faces from a moment ago when they were under a pinch. Just a moment ago, they appeared to be shaking with fear, and now look at their happy faces. It was completely different. And so was the atmosphere in the stadium. It was totally different than what it used to be. The scene at the opposing bench was no different either. Their reserve players had sprung onto the sidelines to express their joy. Even their coaching staff had joined the celebration. Yelling and hugging, they were celebrating this moment to the fullest. A polar opposite to the scene at the opposing box, the reserve players of Japan were wailing in their box. It was a huge blow, a blow that could possibly knock them out. Yet still, they hadn't lost the game. Though a rather crucial goal, the game was far from over. So, they had to pull their shit together and prepare themselves for what was about to come. After wailing for a while, most of them recomposed themselves for the remaining time. Hiro, too, did the same as he let go of the worries that shackled him for a brief moment. If only he had scored that goal, the scenario might have been different. He couldn't help but feel guilty about missing such an opportunity. But he couldn't continue to sulk. What has happened has happened. No risk, no reward. Hiro reminded himself, freeing his mind from the guilt that had been weighing him down. He knew he had to move forward and learn from this experience. Tilting his head up, he glanced at the sky. It was already dark, and the shimmering lights of the stars had begun to dot the vast expanse. The stadium lights were casting a bright glow on the field, contrasting sharply with the night sky. And the atmosphere was still as electrifying as ever. Still, he didn't feel overwhelmed by the buzzing atmosphere in the stadium. Instead, he felt quite calm about it. Be it when the cheers were for him or against him, it was the place where he belonged to. So, he felt quite at ease now that he made peace with himself. Even if it was because of his inability to score that led to this situation, he still couldn't shy or hesitate from taking risks. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill his lungs. Then he walked to his position to resume the game. After a while of celebration, all of the players regrouped for the continuation of the game. Just as they positioned themselves, manager Haruki decided to make some changes in the team. Along with Akutsu, he made several other substitutions. In place of defenders, he brought in attackers, completely altering the formation of the team. It was a risky move, but they could no longer shy from taking risks. What's the worst that could happen? They might concede yet another goal. But does it even matter? They were already losing, and if they did nothing about it, they'd get thrown out of the tournament. Their hope for advancement depended on this victory. So, they had to do everything in their power to win this game. Beep. Once again, the game resumed with their kickoff. And from the had to do everything in their power to win this game. Beep. Get-go, they rallied toward the opposing post, vying for a goal. They launched a full frontal attack as every single one of them made a desperate struggle for an equalizer. However, despite trying their absolute best, they failed to score. As the final whistle sounded, the opposing players erupted into a triumphant cheer as the realization of their victory washed over them. They collapsed to the ground, some lying on their backs, staring up at the sky with a mixture of exhaustion and elation. Others knelt, heads bowed in prayer or thanks, overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotions. At the same time, a rather heavy feeling of defeat gripped the hearts of the players of Japan, making them wail. Many covered their face in shame as they couldn't bring themselves to face their supporters. Slowly, tears trickled down their face. At first, only some wept, but as time passed, more and more of them started weeping, and soon an outburst took place in the field. Even the toxic fans could no longer bring themselves to complain after seeing the burst of emotion on the field. Now how could they bring themselves to tell that they didn't try hard enough after seeing them weeping like that? They had given their best, but it wasn't enough. And what could be more concrete proof than those tears? Chapter 4, A One-Time Skip 2. Taking small, steady steps, Kota trudged up the path to his house, his muddy cleats slung over his shoulder, while his jersey appeared to be in a tattered state, a testament to the hard-fought battle he had just recently. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, and the afternoon sun was casting long shadows on the ground. Right now, he was on his way home after a tiresome match. Despite a hard-fought match, his team had lost, and he couldn't shake this feeling of uneasiness gripping his heart. For the most part of his journey back home, his eyes full of distress remained fixated on the ground beneath, and it almost appeared as if he was moving barely on instinct. As he neared his house, he ran into many familiar faces. Seeing his dispirited state, they concernedly asked him if he was all right. Yet, he couldn't even bring himself to respond to their worries. And so he walked past them without uttering a word, completely ignoring his presence. Those people, too, didn't find his attitude rude. Instead, they looked at him with eyes full of pity as they started sympathizing with him. He must have lost the match, so I hope he doesn't take it to his heart. They whispered among themselves as they tried guessing. Then finally, Kota reached his house. Wearing a dispirited look on his face, he opened the door. A familiar creak resounded as he stepped inside. "Mom, I'm home," he called, his voice heavy with fatigue and disappointment. In the kitchen, "Kota," his mother's voice rang out, filled with an unusual excitement that Kota was too tired to notice. He tossed his cleats aside and started heading upstairs. Disappointed, he then headed straight to his room. Coming from a football match, usually his mother would nag him to get cleaned first. And for sure, looking at his state, he needed a much-needed cleaning. If he rushed into his room without getting cleaned, he'd probably incur the wrath of his mother. But he wanted nothing more than to lie down on his bed at the moment. Even so, he couldn't bring his sweat-drenched jersey to his bed now, could he? So, as he slid the door of his room and walked into his room, he undressed and tossed his sweat-drenched jersey onto the laundry basket. With a wall full of football idols, a fair amount of trophies, and certificates displayed in the cabinet, Kota's room was neatly cleaned and perfectly organized. Even his only table was immaculately organized. There wasn't even a single drop of trash on the floor. Among those walls full of football idols, one figure reigned supreme. Just above his bed was a huge poster of Hiro. Even at his table, you could see his picture with Hiro at the airport, framed, not to mention his autograph. If any looked at his room, they'd tell at one glance how much big of a fan he was of Hiro. Changing into a pair of casual clothes, he then jumped onto his bed. Lying with his face facing the ceiling, he mumbled while looking at the poster of Hiro right above his head. "When will I get to play like you? You're really impressive, Hiro. Just how did you manage to change your adversity into your strength? I really can't fathom how you overcame one of the biggest losses of your life and even improved from it. That World Cup campaign, even when you were the most impressive player of the campaign, you took the whole blame on you." While he was reminiscing about the scene of the U17 World Cup 2023, where Japan had lost against Spain, A scene of the press conference flashed in his mind. Defeated as Japanese players returned home, reporters bombarded them with questions, criticizing their performance. They didn't spare a little empathy as they blamed the players for their failure. Unlike his other teammates, Hiro didn't receive much criticism. Yet he sprang onto the camera as he took the entire blame on him to shield his teammates from the public defamation. "We're sorry for disappointing you, but all of the players have given their absolute best. So, if there's anyone to blame, then it should be me for not being an idol captain." As he said those words, he looked straight into the camera. Then silently, he bowed his head before apologizing. "I'm sorry for not being able to fulfill your expectations." When he apologized publicly in front of so many people, everybody was stunned by his actions. They couldn't bring themselves to open their mouth as they were left utterly speechless by his choice of action. A stunned silence filled the space. Why was he shouldering the blame? He had been nothing but impressive. Yet, right now he's shouldering the entire blame. Reporters and fans alike, they couldn't bring themselves to blame Hiro. Some reporters even felt apologetic for pressuring the team, while the general public, upon witnessing Hiro's gesture, started becoming furious at the reporters. But before they could haul curses at the reporters, other players, and coaching staff, all of them bowed their heads as they apologized for not letting them down. And the situation became even more awkward for a while. Then the entire space resonated with the words of encouragement as fans started cheering. The entirety of the fans became united as they showered the players and the staff with words of encouragement and appreciation. Even though he didn't bring them the glory that they desired, he later was nominated as the best player of the tournament for his performance. However, he couldn't finish on top as he barely missed out on the top spot against Matteo. Even so, Matteo's led team couldn't clinch the glory as well. The title ultimately got snatched by the Germans. It would be injustice and disrespectful to use the word snatch, though. Since they defeated all those title contenders fair and square, it'd be more acceptable to say that they deservingly won the cup. They didn't have any one single star player who stood out from the rest in the tournament. But instead, they had a whole batch of star players who played as a team. That's why they won the title. As there's a saying, teamwork makes the dream work. Chapter 402 Ticket. Step, step, step. Then while he remained flat on his bed, suddenly he heard sound footsteps heading his way. It looked like his mother was coming to him. And since he hadn't cleaned himself, he'd probably get scolded by her. But for some reason, he wasn't scared of her scolding today. So, despite noticing her footsteps, he remained idle on his bed. He then rolled over to face the wall so that his mother won't get to see his face. The door to his room slid open and his mother walked in. "Kota, you need to check this out." She spoke as she entered his room. This wasn't what he expected. The tone of her voice didn't sound mad, even the slightest. Instead, it sounded quite cheerful. Perhaps did she not see his dirty laundry? What is she talking about? What I need to check? Several thoughts made it to his mind as he remained idle in his bed with his back facing his mother. "Kota, you got something in the mail today," she said, holding out the envelope. "I think you're going to want to see this." "Huh, mail? Who'd mail me?" In this day and age, people still send mail. He was quite perplexed to hear that someone had sent him a mail. Then he turned his head to face his mother. Just as he looked at her, he saw her with a smile holding an envelope. At first, he thought that she was making things about the mail. But now that he saw her with an envelope, his doubts all vanished. Someone had really sent him a letter. But who could it be? Nobody came to his mind, no matter how hard he tried to think about the person who could possibly send him a mail. Skeptically, he got out of his bed to take a look at the envelope. For some reason, his mother couldn't stop smiling. He hadn't applied for any clubs, so it shouldn't be either. Or did a club scout him? He couldn't rule out the possibility after seeing the cheerful expression of his mother. This kindled a spark of hope within him. Then he took the envelope from his mother, noting the elegant paper and the official-looking seal. His heart skipped a beat as he carefully tore it open. Inside was an invitation letter printed on thick, cream-colored paper. The header read, "Kota, you are invited to the professional debut match of Takahashi Hiro. Much love, Hiro." The letter, although short, was direct. And Along with the invitation came a ticket for the match. He read the words once, then again, unable to believe his eyes. "No way," he whispered, his fatigue forgotten, replaced by a rush of exhilaration. "Mom, can you believe this? This is amazing." His mother beamed at him, her joy matching his own. "I know how much Hiro means to you, Kota. You followed his journey so closely. I'm so proud of you." The reality of the invitation began to sink in. He was going to see Hiro, his idol, play in his first professional match. Overcome by exhilaration, Kota jumped on his toes, swinging the tickets, expressing his joy. He couldn't believe that the person he had admired the most was inviting him to the match. And that too, the debut match. But all along he had been forgetting something. Seeing the ecstasy of her son, his mother couldn't help but feel touched by the gesture of Hiro. He's really something. He even remembered the promise he had made back then. As he heard those words coming out of her mouth, a realization dawned on him. That's right, how could he forget about the promise? Hiro had kept his promise, even when he had forgotten about it. It was way back then, but he still remembered his promise. Thinking about it made him feel guilty. Suddenly, his eyes started getting moist, and soon tears trickled down his face as he could no longer hold back himself. Noticing those tears, his mother immediately embraced him. "Mon, Sobi, I didn't even remember our sob. Promise." But he remembered it. He started sobbing as he spoke his heart. Holding up in her arms, she could feel the guilt in her words. But at this moment, her respect for Hiro grew exponentially. Her son might have forgotten the promise, but still he kept it. This showed how nice of a person he was. Not only was he a great player, but he also was a nice human being. "Thank you, Hiro. You really are the perfect idol to follow." She thanked Hiro in her heart, feeling touched. But the match was tomorrow on the weekend, and they had planned a family dinner. His father had already reserved a table too. So, would it be still possible to go to the match? Then Kota released his grip and pulled back. Looking at his mother with teary eyes, he spoke, "But what about the dinner, Mom?" Dad seemed really excited about this family dinner. Noticing the concern in his voice, her tone softened as she spoke. "Don't worry about it. I'll talk to Dad. We all will go see him play instead. I'm sure he'll be happy about it." "Can we go? Can we really go?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. His mother nodded, her smile unwavering. "Of course we'll go, and we'll all go together too." His brows arched as a smile blossomed on his face upon hearing those words of approval. "But for now, go get yourself cleaned," she continued, sounding a little mad. For sure, she hadn't forgotten that he had not cleaned yet, and she wouldn't let it slide. But it didn't make him sour. Instead, he happily nodded his head and excitedly stormed off. On my way. That night, Kota could hardly sleep. He lay in bed, clutching the invitation, staring at it, imagining the roar of the crowd, the sight of Hiro stepping onto the pitch, and the thrill of seeing his hero in action against the big boys. It had been 2 whole years since he witnessed Hiro on the big stage. The last match he saw Hiro on the big stage was against Spain in the knockouts of the U-17 World Cup. Chapter 4, 03 Debut or Not. Finally, the day of the match arrived. Putting on his favorite jersey, he arrived at the venue alongside his parents. The stadium was buzzing with the cheers of the excited fans, and the air around the stadium was electric with excitement. As they approached the venue, Kota's excitement grew. The crowd was a sea of team colors, with people of all ages sporting jerseys of their favorite players. But he was the only one dressed in a youth jersey. However, it didn't make much difference since both the jerseys for the senior team and the youth team were almost identical. And if not for the sponsor part, one could hardly differentiate those two. "Mom, can we visit the merchandise store first?" Kota asked, pointing eagerly at a stall selling the club's gear. Though he already had Hiro's jersey, still he wanted to get his hands on those of the senior team instead of the youth team. His mother smiled warmly and nodded, "Sure, let's go." Since it was a home game, the stadium was fairly crowded, though not as packed as during derby matches. Still, there were plenty of people around, creating a lively atmosphere. Squeezing his way, he arrived at the stall. Excitement flashed past his eyes as he reached the merchandise stall. He then began searching for Hiro's jersey, but as he rummaged through the piles, his excitement turned into disappointment. Unable to find what he was looking for, he approached the shopkeeper, a rather old man with kempt hair, who was busy attending to other fans. "Sir, I can't find any jersey with Hiro's name on it," Kota said, his voice tinged with frustration and disappointment. The shopkeeper looked at him, a bit surprised. "Hiro? You mean Takahashi Hiro? Kota no dit enthusiastically." The shopkeeper sighed and spoke while shaking his head. "Little guy, he plays for the youth team, and we don't sell youth team merchandise here." No sooner had he finished his sentence than Kota blurted out, "But he's playing today." He knew that Hiro was playing today with certainty. He had even received a ticket personally from Hiro. So, how could he tell that he wasn't going to play today? No matter what, he wasn't going to take no for an answer. As he blurted out, a murmur spread through the nearby crowd. "What's that little kid talking about?" someone asked. "Takahashi Hiro is making his debut in today's match," another echoed, sounding intrigued. "But I didn't hear any announcement," a fan nearby said, frowning in confusion. Kota's words stirred a buzz of gossip. Though many recognized Hiro's name, few had heard of his debut. The excitement in the crowd grew as they began to discuss Hiro's unexpected debut, speculating about his performance. Even though it was a word coming out of a kid's mouth, they were intrigued to hear that Hiro was making his debut. Well, why wouldn't they be intrigued? After all, he was the wunderkind they all wanted to see in the pro league so eagerly. For a while, his statement generated quite a lot of stir. But after a while, they all laughed it off as they thought of it as nothing but a kid's fantasy. Even with Kota's seriousness, they couldn't take his words seriously. "Just like you, we too wanted to see his debut. But it's not going to happen today, kid." One of the fans spoke as he denied Kota's claims. Then another chimed in, "Yeah, the club would have made the announcement if it were to debut." And soon everybody discarded his claims as a joke. Furrowing his brows, Kota tried to defend himself as he started throwing a tantrum. He's going to play today? But still, no one took him seriously. Instead, many of them laughed at him and ridiculed him, while many replied considerately as they tried to soothe him. "Is Hiro really not playing today? But I've personally read his letter, so it shouldn't be the case." Then it means that his debut was kept secret. Kota's mother tried to figure out the situation. She knew the truth. Yet, she chose not to argue with those who laughed at her son. It wasn't worth arguing with them. So, she turned to her son. Looking at him with eyes full of support, she tried to console him. "Kota, don't be sad. They just don't know about it, because unlike us, Hiro hadn't personally sent them the tickets. They'll know about it once they see him." Her words had a magical effect on him as they immediately made him feel better. They then made their way to their seats. The stadium's energy was palpable even when the players were yet to make their appearance. While making their way to their seats, many gave them a strange look. While some gossiped and laughed about him behind his back, "Look, it's that strange kid who said that Hiro was debuting today." No matter where you go, you'll always find some toxic people. And it wasn't any different in the stadium either. There were quite a few toxic people present in the stands. But his mother didn't allow their negativity to get on him. And finally, after walking for a while, they arrived at their seat. It was quite near to the pitch, and the view from there was one of the best in the entire field. Looking at the pitch in front, his heart pounded with excitement. It wasn't his first time watching a football match in a stadium. Yet, he couldn't stop feeling excited about this match. Then after a while, starting players emerged out of the tunnel. Kota excitedly looked at the players emerging out of the tunnel, his eyes desperately searching for Hiro. But he couldn't find him in the starting lineup. This greatly disappointed him, and many people even ridiculed him for his earlier confident claims. Frowning, he turned to his mother. "Mom, is he really not playing?" Speechless, his mother hesitated to reply. More like she had no words to reply to. What was she going to tell him? She didn't want to disappoint him, but she had to at least console him. After all, he was her son, and she couldn't leave him like that. Chapter 404, he's playing. Isn't that Hiro? Where? Hiro's entrance immediately caused an uproar in the stadium. Many looked at him with awe and surprise as he emerged out of the tunnel alongside the reserve players. Kota's frown lifted upon seeing Hiro. Replacing the previous frown, an ecstatic smile blossomed on his face. He excitedly waved his hand as he cheered at the top of his voice, trying his hardest to get Hiro's attention. "Big brother Hiro, best of luck." At this moment, Hiro turned to look in his direction. Smiling, he waved back his hand as he responded to his cheers. This gesture of Hiro made him even more ecstatic. His words reached him, and he couldn't be more happy about it. It's not that Hiro could hear him, but it was more like Hiro knew exactly where he'd be sitting. So, he addressed him based on the location of his seat, since originally it was him who had sent him the tickets. I told you all," sweeping his gaze around him, Kota mumbled proudly. At this moment, the same people who until a moment ago were criticizing him wandered their eyes as they tried to avoid locking eyes with him. They were guilty of their behavior and comments, and he could see it vividly in their gestures, but he didn't need their apology. Their guilt was enough to satiate him. As much as it caused an uproar in the stadium, it created even more of an uproar outside the stadium. Even Hiro's teammates weren't aware of it, let alone the general public. "He's making his debut today. I thought that he was going outside. Wasn't anybody aware of it?" Players of the youth team discussed among themselves as they noticed the figure of Hiro on the projector screen. Right now, all of them were gathered together to watch the match. There were quite a lot of new faces. After that World Cup campaign, he helped his team to 2 consecutive league titles, while also managing to bag the title of the most valuable player of the tournament and top scorer of the tournament for both those years. He had been nothing but sensational since his debut, and he definitely left his mark on the league by bagging 3 consecutive league titles along with 3 consecutive player of the tournament and top scorer of the tournament. Shun had already made his debut, but he was out on a loan, and among the previous prospects with whom he had shared his moments in the youth league, only 2 were remaining in the team. Others all had left the club to either advance in their career or the club had to let them go because their performance wasn't satisfactory. Surviving the ruthless selection of the fittest, Tatsuki Siko and Naoto Miyashiro managed to secure their spot in the team. Though Tatsuki had been poached by several other teams outside Japan, he rejected them all. It's not that he didn't want to move overseas, but more like he was waiting for an offer from the top 5 leagues, so he rejected them. Mostly he had been approached by teams from the Scottish Premiership like Motherwell FC, Ross County FC, and teams from the Saudi League who offered him quite a lucrative salary. "Seems like I'm no longer the star of the team," Tatsuki cracked a joke while moving forward. Though he was a starter for the team, he wasn't starting today. Having played 6 matches without any rest, it was bound to happen sooner or later. And right now he was accompanying Hiro to the reserve box. Says the one who's the top scorer of the team. Hiro responded sarcastically while still waving his hand at the stand. Bagging 11 goals in 7 matches. Right now, he was the top scorer of their team and was only a goal behind the top scorer of the league. Their position in the league, however, wasn't impressive as currently they were sitting in 7th position. Losing 1, drawing 3, and winning 3, their form wasn't very impressive. Not to mention the injury of their Brazilian playmaker Eriksson. His injury had put them in an even tighter spot, and Hiro was expected to fill in his shoes. So, he's that fanboy whom we talked about previously. Looking in Kota's direction, Hiro's mother remarked to her husband, who right now was seated by her side. "Yes, seems so." Obviously, he had invited his parents. Then the 2 of them sat beside each other as they reached the substitution box. Aside from him and Naoto, he hardly knew anyone else on the team. The crowd was still as energetic and excited as ever. Eventually, as the match kicked start, people focused their attention on the match and forgot about him. But occasionally, they'd still glance at the substitution box to see if he was coming in. They just couldn't hold their excitement of watching him play. Such was the anticipation in the stand today. They were playing against Gamba Osaka, who were a rather formidable team. Currently placed at the 2nd place, they had not lost a single game yet, and it didn't seem like they were going to lose this game as well. Formidable in both offense and defense, they were in charge of the game, dominating the ball possession, They hardly made any mistakes. Still, the stalemate continued despite their efforts to score. As impressive as ever, Naoto made countless amazing saves to keep them in the game. But if it continued, it seemed as if it was only a matter of time before the opposing team scored a goal. Even so, Naoto continued to make countless impressive saves. But despite his best efforts to keep them in the game, he still ended up conceding a goal in the 42nd minute of the match. Then again, before he could even compose himself, he conceded yet another goal just minutes before the end of the first half. Just like this, the first half ended up with them tailing behind the opposing team by 2 goals. Chapter 4 sute change reputation stat. Conceding 2 goals in a matter of minutes had left them utterly disappointed and frustrated. And right now an unusual silence had gripped the air around their locker room. A palpable sense of heaviness was lingering around the locker room, making it appear quite suffocating and difficult place to be at. Yet, having no choice, Hiro remained seated in his seat, silently observing his surroundings, hoping for a change of scenario. It wasn't his first time experiencing such moments. He had experienced a lot, but it was his first being so helpless. Being new on the team, he didn't have any right to speak his heart, and he couldn't even bring himself to tell them to cheer up, as it wasn't his place to speak. Helpless, he just sat at the edge of his seat. Then finally a change took place as a middle-aged man with kempt hair, dressed in a casual-fitted suit, made his way into the locker room. His face was devoid of any emotion, and he appeared as if he was surrounded by an unusual aura of calmness. Unaffected by the pervading heaviness in the room, he calmly swept his gaze across the room. "All right, listen up," Coach Tatsuya began, clapping his hands to gather everyone's attention. "We've had a tough first half, but this game is far from over. We need fresh energy out there, then only can we turn things around." Standing at the center of the room, he began his speech, one filled with passion and hope. Though he didn't say much, it still was enough to divert the attention of the players away from the tragedy that had struck them a moment ago. It was enough to fill most of them with newfound hope and determination. Even Hiro couldn't agree more that his speech moved him deeply. He had already met this man whom everyone addressed as the manager. But since he was a man of few words, he didn't get to know him well. Regressing to the past, changes had already started taking place, and he was well aware of it. But there was simply nothing he could do about it than to face those changes. Previously at this time, the team was still managed by the previous manager. However, due to his intervention, things had started to change. A butterfly effect had already started, and he could no longer be sure of the future. Among those many changes was the appointment of Tatsuya as the new manager of the team. Seeing Tatsuya in action was a different experience. It was almost as if he was meeting a new person than the one whom he had previously met. Similar to him, he was also new here. In fact, he had only arrived here just a year ago. But the amount of influence he had on the team was something many couldn't even achieve in a long time. When he talked, everybody listened without any exception. Well, why wouldn't they listen to him? After all, he kept his message short and precise. No bullshit. "Now, Hiro," Coach Tatsuya said, turning to him with a steady gaze. "You're going in. Show them what you've got." Hiro felt his heart race. For a while, he couldn't even bring himself to react as he remained still, trying to digest the announcement. He hadn't expected to be subbed on so early. At most, he had expected to be subbed after the 70th minute of the match. But he was now going to debut. Excitement filled him as he heard the announcement. However, he couldn't keep his manager waiting now, could he? So, he immediately nodded his head. Determination flashed in his eyes. He could barely conceal his excitement from leaking. But despite his attempt on trying to hide his emotions, right now, he was like an open book. Anybody could read his emotions if they carefully looked at him. Tatsuki, who was seated right beside him, nudged him lightly as he whispered, "Go out and shine." Then, after speaking a little more, he dismissed the meeting. However, just as he was about to walk out, Tatsuya turned to look at Hiro and spoke, "Give it your all out there." Most of the players in the locker room were happy about the change, but some appeared quite dissatisfied with it as well. They were reluctant to give their spot to a teenager who was barely 16 years old. Fearing the wrath of the manager, they still kept their dissatisfaction to themselves as they just grunted and stormed away without saying anything. Hiro had already expected it, so it didn't bother him much as well. He just turned a blind eye to their disgruntlement and instead focused his attention on the match ahead. He knew exactly why he was given the opportunity. They were losing at the moment, and he was expected to deliver. If he failed to deliver, it would negatively affect his chances of getting any more gaming minutes later on. But if he manages to turn things around, his evaluation would improve drastically. Sure, being only 16 years old, people might not place such high expectations on him in the first place. But he always liked to think otherwise. He liked to put himself under pressure so he wouldn't sway away from his path. If they don't have such high expectations of him, then the more better. But if they did, then he didn't want to disappoint them. Well, truth be told, the coaching staff might not have such high expectations of him. But what about the people? Seeing him play, they'd probably have huge expectations of him. They'd probably want him to make a change. Just as he was about to walk outside of the room, he got stopped by Naoto. It appeared as if he was about to say something. His eyes glistened with pride as he converged his eyes on Hiro. Then he spoke, "Glad to play alongside you once again." When he was speaking those words, Tatsuki too joined in. "We believe in you," Naoto added while Tatsuki nodded in response. New quest. Requirements. 1. Score a goal. 2. Achieve a match rating of more than 7. 3. Avoid loss. Reward. Copy a talent of your choice from one of the opposing players. Failure. Deduction of a point from your reputation stat and limit on one of your talents for the next game. After making it to the pro, his system had changed quite a bit, and new features have been unlocked. Just like the reputation stat, it was one of the stat that was unlocked after he made it to pro. Currently, he has 27 reputation stat points out of 100. Curiously, he had asked if there was a system to grade players based on the reputation stat numbers. And for some reason, there was indeed a grading system as such. 9100, Legendary. 8089, Elite. 7079, Star. 6069, Notable. 5059, Known. 4049, Recognized. 3039, Established. 2029, Emerging. 1019, Local Talent. 09, Unknown. Normally, kids his age were mostly regarded as local talent, but he had already surpassed it. There's also a consequence for dropping reputation points. Just like in real life, when one player made a bad decision or had a poor performance, it would negatively affect his relation with the club and the fans. Chapter 406 Brute Force. Chapter 406 Brute Force. Having closely observed the game until now, he could tell that it wasn't an easy feat to fulfill all 3 requirements of the system. Yet, he didn't feel discouraged either. Nor did the quest surprise or startle him. As Hiro reached the periphery of the tunnel, all of a sudden the stadium lights felt brighter than they did a moment ago. The cheers sounded louder, and for some reason, his heart started pounding. The announcement had already been made, and he could vividly feel the anticipation of the fans. It wasn't his first time experiencing such a nerve-wracking moment, but it was his first time making a senior debut for a pro football team. In his previous life, he had been just one step short of experiencing this moment, but now he could vividly experience this moment firsthand. So, it made him a little tense. All of his teammates had already left him, and right now, he was all alone in the tunnel. Standing still, he tried to savor this moment and the emotions he was feeling at the moment. He could audibly hear the loud cheers coming from outside. Mixed with the cheers, he could also hear his name being called out. Just from the cheers alone, he could tell that it was rather hectic outside. Taking deep breaths, he then tried to calm himself. Then, as his heart rate stabilized, his eyes flashed with determination. "Let's do this." The moment he walked out of the tunnel, he was met with a roar of excited fans. The excited cheers of the fans resonated all over the stadium, shaking every nook and cranny of the stadium. Seas of passionate supporters were chanting his name, greeting him, and expressing their excitement. Hiro himself couldn't fathom the welcome he received from the fans. It far exceeded his imagination. Yet, he kept his cool as he walked onto the field. Taking steady steps, he positioned himself in his position while the camera followed every single detail on the field. "I bet he's quite nervous to even look at the stands," his father joked. "If you were to walk onto the field in the presence of this many people, let alone play, you wouldn't even be able to take a single step forward," his mother replied sarcastically. "Go get him, big brother Hiro," Kota shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the crowd, but his spirit unwavering. Beep! The second half began, and the energy shifted almost immediately. The cheers of the supporters muffled a little as they concentrated on the game, and the noise subsided a little. Being the youngest player on the field, the pressure on him was nothing but huge. And even his build as compared to the rest of the players, he looked kind of scrawny despite having a muscular build. Since the opposing team was starting the kickoff, he didn't get to touch the ball immediately. People had to wait some while for his first touch. Then, just minutes after the start of the second half, he ran into his first obstacle of the game. He came face to face against an opposing player in the midfield. "I'm sure you're a gifted boy, but in front of absolute strength, your talents won't amount to anything." The opposing player, who by comparison was much bulkier than Hiro, thought as he saw Hiro approaching him. Confidence took possession of him as he launched himself straight at Hiro. It's not that he was arrogant, but he couldn't find his teammates open, so he had to create chances by himself by getting past Hiro. Having studied his opponents, Hiro could tell with a little certainty how his opponents would react. And the player in front of him mostly liked to play physical games. He wasn't the typical dribbler with fancy techniques, but he could hold on to the ball pretty well, taking advantage of his build. And noticing him rushing toward him, Hiro could tell that he was going to take advantage of his build. Well, why wouldn't he take advantage of his build? Just look at their sizes. He was almost thrice his size. Even with such an advantage, he'd only be a fool if he wouldn't take advantage of the advantage he had over him. Despite knowing that, he wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he was prepared to face him. But he'd only be a fool if he was going to respond brute force with brute force. Even if he tried to put all his strength into handling him, he wouldn't be able to. And he was aware of his weakness. However, as much as his build was advantageous to him, it was equally disadvantageous too. Even if he could manhandle Hiro, he had to be careful while tackling with him. One wrong move, and he'd get booked. Yet despite the disadvantage, he still approached Hiro intending to use his build against him. It wasn't his first time facing players who were weaker than him, and he was well aware of the stunts those weaker players would try to pull against him to hinder him. But now if he got worried about harming them or fouling them, how could he play? Physical contact is often common in football, and football isn't a sport for kids. Then, just as he approached Hiro, he did what he was best at. He tried to shove Hiro away, overpowering him with his strength. And Hiro didn't avoid him, nor did he try to pull any of those stunts to curry favor from the referee. Instead, he fought back. "You're quite sturdy, huh, kid?" the opposing player thought as he felt the strength of Hiro. But it still wasn't enough to compete against him. It had intrigued the sea of supporters. Despite being on the weaker side and despite defending not being his forte, he was putting up a fight against an opponent who surpassed him. They just couldn't help but applaud his efforts. But they knew that he wouldn't last long either. So they didn't put much faith in him to stop the opposing player. Chapter 4, 07 Assist. As if they had already predicted the outcome, they made an all-knowing expression as they witnessed the fall of Hiro. After struggling for a while, Hiro's resistance finally broke as he got overpowered by his opponent. Steadily, he started falling to his side first. At this moment, a subtle triumphant smile formed on the face of the opposing player. "You've got great potential, kiddo." Just when he started to think that he had managed to get past Hiro, his expression changed rapidly. His eyes widened with surprise as he found that he no longer had the ball on his feet. Realization struck him as he realized his fall was intentional. He had been tricked. Hiro faked his fall to lower his guard. He made him feel superior only to snatch the ball away from him. From the beginning, he had been aiming for the ball. During his fall, he swept his feet at the ball. Managing to hit the ball, he snatched the ball away from him. His way of stealing the ball from his opponent, who was almost thrice his size, left the entire stadium shocked and excited. The way they looked at him with eyes full of surprise made it seem as if they had never seen such a way of stealing the ball. They could no longer keep their omniscient attitude. It was way beyond their expectation. Mesmerizing the entire stadium, he walked away with the ball, leaving his opponent with a flustered expression. And even after stealing the ball from such a tough opponent, he didn't display a single shred of happiness on his face. Instead, he appeared as if he was already preparing for his next move, which actually was true. Making use of his skill Hawkeye, he scanned the entire field in search of his teammates. Many were still processing what had occurred in the field, while many had already started moving. His skill had limits, but he didn't have any time to worry about it. Right now, his sole focus was to get a goal back. As he searched gaps throughout the field using his skill, his focus peaked, and suddenly everyone around him felt like they were moving in slow motion. It hadn't happened to him before, even while using the skill. Immersed in this incredible feeling, he didn't even realize he had tapped into something extraordinary. Though it was only for a slight moment. It did occur to him as if everything was moving in slow motion. At the same time, everything around him got silent. It was as if he was present inside an isolated space. Then, just as he was about to confront one of the opposing players, he struck the ball, cutting through the formation of the opposing players like a hot knife slicing through butter. It traveled toward the opposing box, leaving the opposing players stunned and the fans in awe. The ball was struck with both power and precision. Then, as it approached the arch of the opposing box, it slowed. At this moment, his team's veteran forward appeared in front of the ball. Because of his age, previously when they were under attack, he hadn't dropped back. So, not only did it allow him to conserve his energy, but it also allowed him to make a swift transformation by locating a gap. Though he read the pass well, he still wasn't agile enough to outperform his pursuer. So, his only option was to immediately take a shot from outside the box. And he did just that. Bam! He struck the ball with power. As he struck the ball, it glided toward the post. Though he wasn't agile enough, he had an impressive shooting. Precise and powerful, his technique was one of the finest in the entire league. And his finishing was unquestionable. The opposing keeper dived with his arms stretched out. Goal! The announcer's voice boomed. At the same time, the crowd erupted in cheers as the atmosphere of the stadium turned electric. They finally managed to get a goal back. And Hiro, with his first touch, managed to make a difference. An assist in his first game. What a way to announce his arrival. The crowd will remember his performance. The history will. The youngest player in the league to register an assist. The commentator was full of praises. Hiro felt a surge of adrenaline rushing through his veins, but still kept his cool. Ten Miyagi, the veteran player, rushed toward him while pointing his finger at him to thank him for the assist and dedicated the goal to him. While at the same time, his teammates, whom he barely knew, also rushed toward him. Even those who previously appeared dissatisfied by the coach's decision rushed toward him to celebrate the goal, wearing ecstatic smiles on their faces. What are you? Just how did you even notice him? Everybody praised him as they treated him as equal. At this moment, he wasn't just a special kid, but he was one of their teammates. Their faith in him took a leap as they became more trusting of him. The celebration lasted for a while, and the entire stadium joined the celebration. Cheering at the top of their voice, they displayed their support for the team. With the score now 2-1, the team was back in the game. Then, as the celebration came to an end, everybody returned to their position to resume the game. The opposing team tried to regain control, but Hiro's presence disrupted their rhythm. His performance only continued to improve after that assist. With his speedy dribbles, he ran amok in the field, creating many opportunities for his teammates. And the opposing players could hardly stop him. Competing against him in terms of speed, it was almost near to impossible. After watching him play, it was clear to the opposing players that he had something special in him. And if they continued to let him lose, it'd only be a matter of time before they lost their lead. So, they started playing more aggressively. Chapter 408 here to improve. In the 75th minute, Hiro spotted a gap in the opposing formation. It was a rather small gap, and it was rather questionable that he'd even reach it. Nonetheless, he had to at least try. Then he tricked his marker and rushed toward the gap he had spotted at full speed. It wasn't easy to trick his marker, who was sticking to him as if he was his shadow. But still, with his swift movements, he managed to leave him. At the same time, Tatsuki, who had the ball, noticed his run and struck the ball with power and precision toward the designated spot where he was headed. Opposing players rushed to intercept the pass, and immediately the scene around the field became extremely chaotic. Despite his attempt, it occurred to him that he wouldn't make it to the ball in time. So, he had to think of something else. He had to think outside the box to reach it. Noticing the gap between him and the ball, opposing fans became joyous, and a smile formed on many of their faces. However, the smile on their faces didn't last long. Stretching his legs, Hiro slid as he tried to control the ball. Let alone control the ball, one might even have difficulty controlling their own body. But it seemed as if he had no difficulty in doing so. He skillfully controlled the ball, leaving both the opposing fans and opposing players stunned. Just how good of a control does one need to possess to pull off a trick like that? After witnessing this action of his, none could doubt his abilities. It wasn't just because of his achievements in the youth league or the popularity that had earned him a spot on the team, but he truly deserved this opportunity, so he was playing here right now. At this moment, it became crystal clear to everyone watching him that he was here to make a difference, and he rightfully deserved to be here. After controlling the ball, he immediately recomposed himself. Then, without losing momentum, he advanced. There were two defenders in front of him, both equally skilled and twice his size. Yet, their presence failed to terrify him or make him doubt. Hiro looked at them with his striking eyes as he challenged both of them at once. He had already come so far, and he wasn't going to stop. It's not that he didn't want to stop, but he couldn't locate his teammates around him. And it occurred to him as if the only way was ahead. He just couldn't back down. More and more opposing players were rushing on him from behind. So, taking a step back wasn't an option either. Veteran Miyagi had been already replaced by Tatsuki too. Then he dashed towards him with the ball. With confident and fluid movements, he got through their clutches with ease. Continuing with the same determination, he headed toward the box. After passing those defenders, he found himself all alone in front of the opposing box with only a keeper left to beat. But it wasn't going to be easy, and he knew it well. The opposing keeper wasn't an easy opponent, and he couldn't afford to get carried away either, since he had dribbled through those two defenders. Keeping his composure, he steadily approached the opposing box. At the same time, the opposing keeper, sensing an urgency, left his position to rush on him. He knew that he was their last line of defense. Yet, he was unusually calm. It might be due to the appearance of his opponent, or it might be due to his experience. Who knows what allowed him to remain calm, even in such a scenario? Unlike other players, he didn't have much information on Hiro since it was his first game in the league. But he had faced countless strong opponents in his tenure. So he knew what most of the young players would do in such a situation. They try to shoot with as much power as possible. But his senses said otherwise. Watching Hiro play, he had a foreboding that he might do otherwise. Since he was a skilled dribbler, he might try to dribble him. So, he carefully approached Hiro with his guard raised. He had to be prepared if anything unusual were to take place. Almost at the edge of the box, Hiro encountered the opposing keeper. It wasn't an ideal position for the keeper, but it wasn't ideal for him either. Now, he had only two options, either to shoot or try to dribble him. Ideally, most players would tend to shoot from here, and almost all of the young players would do the same too. But he wasn't going to take the easy way. He was here to challenge himself. He was here to test himself. So, he had to overcome his fear of missing first if he wanted to improve. He had to take risks, and only by doing so would he be able to improve. So, what if he were to get taken down? Did it even matter? He could improve and try another time. But now, if he hesitated to take the risk, he might be able to score, but he'd forever be stuck where he was right now. Kicking the ball with the outside of his foot, he swerved to his left, and it became obvious to everyone present in the field that he was going to try to challenge the keeper. You've already proven yourself, so why are you taking this risk? Just shoot the goddamn ball. Many contorted their face in despair as they watched him trying to take on the opposing keeper. They were worried that he'd fail. Perhaps if they were winning right now, they'd be cheering on him. But reality was different. They were losing at the moment, and they desperately needed a goal to equalize. His one mistake could very well jeopardize their spot in the league. Winning the previous league championship, they had already qualified for the AFC Championship, and they had also booked themselves a spot in the Club World Cup 2025. However, their form as of recent had been nothing but disappointing. Chapter 409 Tatsuki's Improvement. The opposing keeper followed as he chased after him. Then the moment he raised his legs, he became extremely alert. Just as he made contact with the ball, the opposing keeper spread his legs, trying his hardest to block his shot. But he didn't release the ball. Instead, he tapped at the ball and feigned a shot at the crucial moment, causing the opposing keeper to commit. With a delicate chip, he then sent the ball sailing over the keeper's outstretched arms. Helpless, the opposing keeper could only look at the ball with frantic eyes. And as the ball sailed inside the post, the net rippled with its impact. At this moment, the crowd went wild with ecstasy. And all of a sudden, the entire stadium came to life with the excited cheers of the fans. Goal! Kota jumped from his seat, screaming with joy. He did it! He did it! He scored a goal. It was rather noisy around him, with all these people celebrating Hiro's goal. Yet, it didn't matter to him whether his voice could be heard or not. Right now, he was genuinely happy for Hiro, his idol who had not only registered an assist in his debut, but had also scored a goal in his debut. Those weren't his only achievements. By scoring this goal, he also helped his team tie with the opposing team. Now the score was 2-2, and the previously hopeless game had suddenly become entertaining to watch. The game was level now, which meant that it was only starting. Sure, after conceding this goal, the opposing team wouldn't sit idly. They needed to respond, or else they'd be criticized heavily. Dominating the game only to blow away their lead to some teenage boy who made his debut. If they were to lose or tie, only criticism awaited them. Their fans right now were fuming. Many of them were hauling indignant curses at the players. They had allowed a teenage boy to change the flow of the game. Just how useless can they be for them to allow a single boy to toy around their formation? If they didn't respond positively, who knows what kind of reaction their fans would show after the end of the match. No sooner had he scored this goal than Hiro got swarmed by his teammates. The same players who shot him disdainful gazes in the locker room had an unusual spark of happiness glistening in their eyes at the moment. Their joy was rather infectious, as it immediately infected him as well. Giving into the moment, he too celebrated his goal alongside his new teammates. Out of 3 objectives with this goal, he fulfilled one of them. And if he continued to play well, it'd only be a matter of time before he'd fulfill all 3 of it. However, the match was still far from over. If the opposing player got 1 goal back, it'd very well send his effort down the drain. So, he and his teammates were both required to be sharp to avoid the worst possible outcome. The match then resumed as they all took their position after the celebration. For a while, the stadium continued to buzz with joy. As expected, opposing team came hard at them after conceding the second goal of the match. They played more intensely than before with better concentration and team play. Yet still, they struggled to score. Their manager made some changes to change the situation. But still, they fell short as they failed to land a decisive shot that could possibly win them the game. And as the match approached its end, intensity surged even further. Both teams pushed for that decisive goal that could win them the goal. Despite his fatigue, Hiro continued to give his all. From the moment he had stepped foot on the field, he hadn't had any chance to rest. Not to mention his decoy run and his dribbles, which created many opportunities for his teammates. All of it consumed a lot of energy. Even so, he couldn't afford to stop. He had to keep on moving until the final whistle. Then in the 89th minute, Hiro received the ball again. This time, he saw Tatsuki making a late run. With a perfectly weighted through ball, he split the defense of the opposing team, supplying a superb pass to Tatsuki. One of the opposing defenders came rushing at him, intending to snatch the ball away from him at all costs. Even if it meant fouling him, He wasn't afraid to do so to stop him, and Tatsuki could visibly feel his intentions. It wasn't his first time being in such a situation after all. A goal at this moment could possibly cost them the entire game, so everybody would be desperate in such a situation. But instead of stopping to control the ball, Tatsuki kept on moving forward. It was almost as if he had no intention of waiting for the ball, which confused the opposing defender. However, it was all the better for him, since he didn't have to pull any foul to stop him if he willingly gave up on the ball. The opposing defender rejoiced, but just as he was about to kick the ball away, Tatsuki's heel reached the ball before his legs could reach the ball. By pulling off this stunt, not only did Tatsuki get past the opposing defender, but he also avoided any kind of battle with the opposing defender. One wrong move, and he'd have disrupted their build-up. Yet, he took his chances, displaying his ability to take risks and remain cool-headed even at the direst moment. Even to Hiro, he appeared like a completely different person. Previously, when he had played with him, he wasn't as daring and composed as he seemed today. Sure, he watched his matches often, but he couldn't notice many changes. However, right now, he could tell that he had improved a lot. No wonder, even teams from Europe came knocking on his door to sign him. Tatsuki, then, while keeping his composure, approached the opposing post. Then, just as he got near enough, he slotted the ball at the bottom right corner. 3-2. The stadium erupted in a frenzy. Chapter 4:10, A Perfect Debut. As the final whistle sounded, players of Kawasaki tossed their hands in the air. Their joy was evident in their ecstatic faces. Their fans rallied together as they celebrated this moment of triumph together with the players. Cheering and swinging their banners, they appreciated the team's hard-fought victory. They were genuinely happy about this win. Opposing fans, on the other hand, weren't happy about the result. In fact, they were mad at their players for bottling the match. Clearly, for most of the game, they had dominated the game, and they even had a 2-goal lead against the opposing team until the second half. But after the first half, it's as if somebody had cursed them. Their performance only deteriorated while the opposing team's performance skyrocketed. Letting the triumphant feeling of victory sink in, Hiro glanced at the stand. The stadium was buzzing with the sweet melody of celebration. It was grandiose. Every moment felt grand. A perfect debut. Registering 2 assists and a goal, he had played a perfect game, rallying his team to victory. Not only had accomplished the objective given by the system, but he had also exceeded it. While enjoying the moment, his gaze landed on Koda. Jumping and cheering with all his might, he was thoroughly enjoying the moment. It made him smile. Smiling, he lifted his hand triumphantly and started waving at him. There was an unusual sparkle in his eyes, one that of admiration and joy. Not only was he fortunate enough to watch his debut, but he was also fortunate enough to witness his hero leading his team to victory. What more could he wish? Then he searched for his parents among the seas of supporters. He knew where they were seated, but despite that, he found it quite difficult to locate them due to the ongoing madness on the stands. People were present in so great of a number that it made it almost impossible to locate them. Still, after tirelessly searching for them for a while, he finally found them. Hidden behind the walls of supporters, he could barely see them, but he managed to catch a glimpse of happiness in their faces, which made his smile even wider. Though, he couldn't continue to sightsee as he got swarmed by his teammates. Congratulating him for his performance, they expressed their gratification. Some ruffled his hair, while some patted his back, and each expressed their gratefulness and pleasure to play alongside him. Quest completed. While at the same time, he heard the notification for the completion of the quest. This only added to his joy, but he was in no hurry to decide whose talent he was going to copy. Claiming the reward could wait until after the end of the celebration. He thought so and ignored the notification. Hiro. Hiro. It only got even more sweeter as suddenly the crowd of supporters started chanting his name. Upon hearing his name being called by so many people, he couldn't help but feel touched. Such an honor. How could it not affect him? Wandering his eyes all over the stadium, he paid homage to those supporters for their gesture. Right now, the entire stadium was buzzing with his name. Reporters and cameramen flocked over him, trying to interview him and capture this wonderful moment with their camera lenses. They could smell big news, and almost every single one of them was sure that it'd make headlines in tomorrow's news. Not only that, it'd provide great coverage for their channels. So, none were willing to miss out on this moment. The stadium was lively, but so was the street. In the streets, people were singing his praises, while at the pub people were discussing his performance with much passion. Just from a single match, he had become the topic of discussion. Damn, I wish I could also play like him. He's too good. Play like him, huh? Then you gotta practice like him as well. In the dormitory, youth players were mesmerized by his performance. Many wished to play like him, while many were sneering at those who wished to play like him. Well, it was to be expected since most of them hadn't spent time with him. But it was known all over the dormitory that he trained like a beast. Even after graduating from the academy, coaches often mentioned his name as an example of discipline and effort. They wanted to instill the philosophy of discipline and effort in the new recruits, so they often used his name. Well, during his time at the academy, he had been the pride of the academy. So, it was only natural for the coaching staff to use his name to educate others. Unknowingly, he had already become the inspiration of many upcoming footballers despite only being 16 years old. He had many admirers who admired his dedication and his gameplay. Hard work beats talent. We've often been told this from childhood. But what if geniuses work hard too? Then you meet a monster, a person beyond comprehension. And Hiro was the very definition of that person. Not only was he already gifted, but he also worked the hardest. So, he remained at the pinnacle during his stay at the club. Not even once did anybody come closer to beating him. To many, he was like a wall that couldn't be surpassed no matter what. While to others, he was a sturdy mountain they could rely on. There were also those who considered him their rival. But many dismissed those thoughts after competing against him for a while. Among those many, one was Najichi. Though he had shared the same jersey with him, he never once considered Hiro his comrade, to whom he always remained a rival he needed to surpass in order to be the best. I won't be defeated, Hiro, Najichi mumbled while clenching his fist. We'll meet soon. Being older than Hiro, he had already made his debut for Vissel Kobe, who currently were sitting at the top of the table. Though he hadn't been as impressive as Hiro, he had been named the young player of the tournament the previous year due to his amazing performance. Back at the stadium, people continued to shower him with praises for his performance. Some could even see a glimpse of the future when he led the national team to the World Cup. Their eyes glistened with hope as they felt extremely hopeful about his future. They just couldn't wait to see more of him. The World Cup was just around the corner, and so was the Asia Cup, though he hadn't debuted for the senior team yet. If he continued to play like this, then who knows, he wouldn't be included in the team despite being only 16 years old. But there was a slight problem. There wasn't much time left for the Asia Cup, and though they had already qualified for the tournament, his future continued to remain uncertain due to the amount of playing minutes he had left for him to convince the national representatives to include him in the team. With all those players from overseas who were already proving their worth in Europe's top 5 leagues, it was a rather difficult task for him to convince the national representative to give him a shot at the team. Just like in this match, he'd have to prove his worth in every single match from now on. He couldn't afford to play decently if he wanted a spot in the national team. But still, despite the limited playing minutes, Hiro was more than ready to take on this seemingly impossible challenge. He wasn't afraid in the least. Instead, he was rather looking forward to the challenges. Then, after the celebration, as he started making his way to the tunnel, he got blocked by several reporters who were dying to interview him. Pausing midway, he stopped to answer their questions. After all, ignoring them wouldn't do any good for him. Instead, it'd only bring him harm and slander. If he ignored them, they'd probably spread rumors saying he was arrogant and ignorant. Worst, they could also jeopardize his candidacy for the national team. Staying on their good side only benefited him. And who knows, due to the media coverage, his chances of getting noticed by the national representatives might increase. After all, there are times when a player is chosen based on the hype rather than their performances. With such thoughts in mind, he sweet-talked the reporters. Sugarcoating his words, He answered their questions in the humblest possible manner. "How did you feel when you stepped out onto the pitch?" one of the reporters asked. "Well, I would be lying if I told you that I wasn't nervous," he said, his words sweet and polite. "But I was prepared for this moment. From the moment I got the call up, I replayed the moment of debut time and again in my mind to prepare myself." While speaking such, he paused for a while and released a sigh. "But even after all those visualizations, when it came to the actual moment, I still got scared, ha ha ha. If not for the trust of Coach Tatsuya and my teammates, I might have locked myself in the bathroom. So, I'm really thankful for their words of encouragement." Sweet, talking his way into the hearts of the reporters, he expressed his gratefulness to his coach and his teammates. His humor lightened up the atmosphere a bit. Chapter 4:11 Emotium. Humorously answering their question, he kept them thoroughly entertained. By now, the stadium had already started to look empty. Still, the buzz continued as home supporters stayed behind cheering on him. The atmosphere was still electric, fueled by the excitement of his stellar performance. 2 assists and a goal. "What do you think of your performance?" another reporter asked. When asked such a question, he didn't hesitate even for a moment. The answer was obvious to him, but he didn't feel like answering straightforwardly. Like how would a young player feel upon having such a marvelous performance in their debut match? Isn't the answer obvious? Obviously, they'll feel great about it. It's a dream debut, so obviously they'll feel ecstatic. So why was he asking such obvious questions? He couldn't help but scoff upon hearing his question. But he couldn't speak his heart now, could he? Present in front of so many people, he couldn't speak anything he wished. Otherwise, it'd ruin his image. Despite his obvious annoyance, he had to remain composed and answer considerately. Even the people present around him shared the same sentiment. It was written on their face that they were annoyed by his question. "Well, how would you feel if you were the one to do it?" He countered with a subtle smile on his face, his tone sweet and polite. "Yeah, what kind of question is it? If you're here to waste time, then allow others to speak." Other reporters expressed their annoyance. Clearly, they weren't happy about him asking such a simple question. Faced with everybody's annoyance, the reporter who asked him that question became extremely flustered. If he persisted on this matter, he'd probably get pressured by other reporters. So, he backed down, apologizing. "Sorry, it was foolish of me to ask such an obvious question." It didn't take a lot for others to forget his idiocy. After a while, once again the mood around them lightened as other meaningful questions followed. As the crowd continued to thin, Hiro couldn't help but reflect on this surreal experience. For a while, everything felt like a dream. He even tried pinching himself to test whether he was in a dream or not. The pain that followed after he attempted trying to awaken himself hurt him, yet it made him smile instead. His debut had exceeded his wildest dreams, and he was overwhelmed by the support and admiration from the fans and media alike. It was such a joyous moment, one he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. But he knew that it was just the beginning, a stepping stone on what he hoped would be a long and successful career. So although it warmed his heart, he couldn't allow himself to get carried away. He could savor it, but he couldn't allow it to get over his head. The trial had only begun. The interview wrapped up, and he finally had the chance to return his team. At this time, one of the match officials brought him the trophy, the Emotium, to award for his excellent performance in the match. "I'm sorry, I couldn't bring it to you sooner. I tried to bring it to you, but you were swarmed by the reporters, which made it almost impossible to squeeze in. So, I hope you'll understand the delay," he apologized as he handed him the trophy. It was shiny, one he had only seen on the screen before, but now it was well within his reach. He then gracefully accepted the trophy. Holding it in his hands, he felt really proud. For a while, he kept on staring fixedly at it. Then he vowed, it won't be the last. Cameramen clicked his pictures while he stood there holding the trophy in his hands. They couldn't miss such an iconic shot. After some more pictures, he walked toward the locker room. But just as he was about to walk inside, he noticed his parents in the stand. Their eyes were glistening with pride while they had a smile on their face. Each appeared genuinely happy for him. Noticing their smiling faces, he lifted the trophy high above his head, addressing his parents. At this moment, the crowd erupted and it got even more noisy. "You deserve it, kiddo. Congratulations. The supporters congratulated and cheered on him as he lifted the trophy. Though they were only cheering on him, he could feel the sheer weight of expectation behind those cheerful cheers and those smiling faces. He could tell that they were expecting great things from him, but it didn't scare him. Instead, he vowed to keep improving, to never let his supporters down. Finally, after addressing the crowd, he was about to exit the pitch. But then again, he saw a familiar face in the crowd. Kota hadn't left the stadium yet, and, due to his small frame, he was getting tossed by the sea of supporters. Hiro could see his struggles, so he decided to address him for his dedication. "Kota!" he shouted as loud as he could, trying to attract his attention. Despite the loud cheers, he audibly heard Hiro's voice. He was calling him, but there was only so much he could do to stick out. It was almost near impossible for him to get in front, so he could only squeeze his way to look at him. "Thank you for your support," Hiro thanked him, his voice loud and clear. "And thank you all for your support as well," he added as he bowed his head before heading inside. In the heat of the moment, he actually wanted to gift his jersey to him. But as he thought about it, he couldn't bring himself to part ways with his debut jersey. As much as the support of that little guy was precious to him, his debut jersey was also precious to him, though his actions made him seem generous in many instances. But deep down, he was selfish in his heart too. "Sorry, I just can't give it to you. But if there's a next time, then I'd gladly do so. Please don't hate me, Kota," he thought as he apologized to Kota in his heart while walking down the tunnel. He felt a little guilty about his selfishness, but he just couldn't bring himself to part ways with his jersey. It was just so dear to him. Chapter 412, Warm Reception. Walking down the tunnel, he kept thinking about the moments outside. The energy of the crowd, the support of the fans, and the amazing moment on the pitch. It was such a blissful and memorable moment that he just couldn't stop smiling. Then he approached his locker room. Due to the intervention of the reporters and the moment he shared with the fans, he had to stay up late on the field. Thus, right now he was all alone. There wasn't a single teammate accompanying him. They were all inside the locker room. Approaching close to the locker room, he could audibly hear the noise coming out of the locker room. He could hear their cheerful laughter and their excited chatters. And the more closer he got to the locker room, the noise only intensified. It made his heart pound, and for some inexplicable reason, it got him tense. Tightening his grip on his trophy, he approached the locker room. Then just as he was about to enter, he took a deep breath. The moment he entered, he was met with a warm reception from his teammates. They clasped their hands as he entered the room, applauding him for his marvelous performance. They cheered on him, showered him with praises, and congratulated him for his performance. Emotions welled inside him as he stood frozen in his place. His eyes glistened with joy while his heart thumped. "Well done, Hiro," Coach Tatsuya said, his voice steady and reassuring. "This is just the start. Keep working hard, and there will be many more nights like this." Darting his gaze to Coach Tatsuya, he nodded his head, absorbing the words of the coach. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. The only thing that he wasn't ready at the moment would be this unusual reception. It was such a warm reception, but he wasn't used to it. Well, it wasn't his first time receiving such a reception, but it was his first time receiving such a reception from the players whom he had admired since his previous life. So, he was a little taken aback by their response. The final whistle might have blown for this match, but for Hiro, it only marked the beginning of a new journey, one filled with promise and potential. And he was more than ready to embark on this arduous journey. Accepting everybody's congratulatory words, he then took his seat. Slowly, he placed his trophy in his cabinet, while the people around him became busy with their own chatters and tasks. All along, he couldn't take his eyes off the shiny trophy. "You deserve it, Hiro," gently clasping on his back, Naoto spoke. "Yeah, but I won't hand it over to you in the next game." Tatsuki sounded dead serious when he said those words, and Hiro could vividly feel his resolve. Though it might have sounded like a joke to others, he knew that he wasn't joking. Rather, it was a challenge. After all, Tatsuki had a competitive spirit. "Then I'll come for your spot," Hiro replied, his resolve unwavering. His response left Tatsuki confused for a while as he tried to figure out what exactly he was talking about when he mentioned that he was coming for his spot. Was he aiming for his spot in the starting 11? That didn't feel right to him since he played as a striker, whereas Hiro played as an attacking midfielder. So, what exactly was he talking about? Tatsuki ransacked his mind as he tried to figure out the meaning behind his response. While he continued to ransack his mind, Naoto immediately caught on to what he was trying to say. So, he let out a subtle chuckle, but kept the news to himself. Then Hiro began to get changed. But while changing his jersey, his eyes landed on his phone. Suddenly, he got an urge to click a photo of him with the trophy. Such urges hadn't occurred to him previously. But for some reason, he got this urge to have his picture taken. Sure, he had already gotten his picture taken out there in the pitch, but they were public photos, anybody could use it. He wanted some for himself to commemorate this moment. So, he asked Naoto to take some pictures of him. Posing along with the trophy, he got his pictures taken. But as he continued to take pictures, soon his teammates bombed his photo. It was meant to be a solo picture, but somehow it turned into a group photo. Naoto, who was taking pictures nonstop, too, couldn't resist the urge to be in the frame. So, instead of taking pictures from the rear camera, he started taking selfies. Hiro got squeezed as everybody tried to fit in the frame. It became extremely chaotic. With all those sweaty bodies colliding with each other, he felt both suffocated and hot. But still, he kept up with their actions as he continued to click pictures with them. Though it felt uncomfortable, it also felt exciting to take pictures and bond with the team. Witnessing all of them taking pictures while making silly poses, laughing, and struggling, the coaching staff was extremely happy about the moment. Until some moment ago, some were fearful of Hiro not being able to bond with all these players. But now, their fear was alleviated as they witnessed Hiro with all the players. So, they couldn't stop smiling at the state of their players. They were genuinely happy about the outcome. So, none tried to stop them and instead let them do whatever they wanted. Just like this, they spent quite a lot of time in the locker room. Then after the commotion died down, they all got dressed and headed outside. Hiro too got changed and joined his teammates to the bus. Stepping out of the stadium into the cool night air, Hiro took a deep breath. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and he felt a wave of contentment wash over him. Tonight had been a dream come true, but he knew it was just the beginning. Chapter 4:13 City Lights. No sooner had they settled into their seats than some of the players immediately fell asleep. The exhaustion was evident on their faces. Although they hadn't shown it previously in the locker room, the match had left them exhausted. And as the last of them settled, the bus driver stepped on the gas pedal and started the bus. The venue, which had previously been alive with roaring fans, was now almost deserted, a stark contrast to the earlier electric atmosphere. Outside, the city lights flickered brilliantly, casting a vibrant glow over the deserted arena. Though the energy of the match had dissipated, the city's nightlife was just awakening. While the bus continued to tread its path through the streets, Hiro gazed out the window, observing the cityscape whiz by. The streets were alive with activity, filled with people navigating the night, especially the salary workers clad in suits and carrying briefcases. They wandered from one pub to another, seeking to wash away the stress of their day. The bustling nightlife of the streets reminded him of his previous life. There was a moment in his life when he too would unwind in such places. Though his circle of friends had been small, there were still a few of them with whom he had a pretty decent relationship. Especially Samaire. She'd help him with his hangovers, listen to his complaints and self-loathing, and help him to his room. Truly, she had suffered a lot due to him. Reminiscing such moments made him feel guilty. Even when blessed with such generous people, he had been nothing but ungrateful, a truly unruly son and an unruly partner. It was supposed to be a joyous night for him, but now that he remembered a glimpse of his past life, he couldn't help but frown. The bus rumbled through the city, and he found himself lost in thought. His companion beside him was already sound asleep, and so were the most of players on the bus. The pulsating rhythm of the nightlife outside the window felt both familiar and distant, evoking a sense of nostalgia. There was a bittersweetness in watching the world go by outside, a strange mix of longing and contentment. And all of a sudden, all his previous glory felt like it amounted to nothing. But life had given him another chance, a chance to turn things around, an opportunity to atone. So although he couldn't change his past, he still had the opportunity to make things right. Then, shaking this heavy feeling of guilt and remorse, he took his phone out of his pocket. Turning on his phone, he opened his account. But just as he opened his account, he noticed a flood of messages, congratulating him for his earlier performance. Many of them expressed their feelings. Few complained about him not informing about his debut. Overall, it seemed that everybody was genuinely happy for him. Reading their messages brought a smile to his face. Without even realizing it, he had started smiling again. And even those heavy feelings that gripped him for a moment ago alleviated on their own as he went through their message. Then he answered their message and sent them the pictures he had taken previously. Few were still online, so they responded immediately. There was still some time left before they reached their destination, so he too engaged in a conversation with them. "You bastard, do you even consider me your friend? You didn't even inform me about your debut," Akashi messaged him, sounding quite furious. "It was meant to be a surprise. Sorry for not telling you sooner," Hiro apologized. "Congratulations on making your debut. You were really great out there," Sumire's text message read as such. "Thank you. You were watching," Hiro texted her back. For some while, he continued to reply to all the texts he had received from his close ones, and he answered all of them. Then after a while of texting, he turned off his phone to receive his reward from the earlier accomplishment. After all, he had yet to claim his reward from the quest. But since almost everyone around him was sound asleep, and he had quality time alone, he didn't feel like waiting. He wanted to claim his reward in silence after getting back to his room. Moving out from the academy, he had been staying with Tatsuki and Naoto. "System activate," he thought as he commanded the system to activate. As usual, a holographic blue panel appeared before him just as he made that command. Though to the outside world, it remained invisible, he could vividly see it. A lot has changed since he advanced to the professional stage. With the addition of new features such as the reputation stat and all others, it had become even more sophisticated. One of the special features was the fusion. It was a feature that allowed him to fuse 2 or more talents based on compatibility. It also allowed him to fuse his talents with his skills, but it had a much greater cost and also a lower probability of obtaining something remarkable out of it. However, he had yet to try this skill because he required sufficient experience points, which he could only earn through quests. After a major update, the feature of the attribute point was replaced with the experience point as well. There were quite a lot of changes in the system. As he skimmed through the system interface, he headed to the reward section to claim his reward. There were quite a lot of options available, but most of them were practically useless to him. So, he ordered the system to eliminate the useless ones and present him with a few that could possibly be some help to him. First touch, A. Powerful right, S. Phantom steps, A+. Clinical finishing, S. Leadership, B. Aggression, B+. Injury resistance, A. Pros really are something else. Even after so much elimination, look at all these talents. Even the lowest is of at least B rank. His eyes glistened with awe and greed as he skimmed through the talents he could copy. Unlike the times he tried to copy from his peers' age, it was a different experience. Almost every single one of those talents was of great use to him. They'd surely increase his potential and be of some help to him in his career. He could only marvel at the sheer number of choices in front of him. Yet, he could only pick one. But most of them were already similar to the ones he possessed. However, even those weren't wasted at this moment with his fusion feature. Even if he selected a similar talent, he could just fuse it later when he had the required experience point. Yet, he still needed to weigh his options and pick carefully. So, he went through their description before deciding his pick. First touch, A. Helps improve your positioning and initial control of the ball upon receiving a pass. Well, my first touch is already good, so I don't think I'll need it, he thought as he went through its description. His first touch, even without the aid of this talent, was already one of the finest in the league. But that didn't mean that it wouldn't help improve his skills even further. If he were to choose this talent, he'd receive a boost to his already impressive ball control. It'd probably take his ball control to a level further. But despite the benefits, he decided to give up on this talent. Powerful Right S increases the muscle mass in your right leg, giving you more firepower and slightly decreases your chances of injuring your right foot. It's a great talent, but if I chose it, it might contradict my other talent ambipedal and create some disbalances. It'd also affect my gameplay, as it'd make me reliant on my right, he deduced as he went through its description. The talent was great, but it wasn't suitable to his style of play since he used both his legs. If he were to choose it, it'd make him a little more reliant on his right foot, which would disrupt his harmony. So, due to such worries, once again he decided to give up on another talent. There were benefits, but there were drawbacks too. So, he had to be careful while choosing the talent he wanted to copy. On to the next talent, Phantom Steps, A+. It wasn't his first time seeing this talent making its appearance. He had already encountered it in the qualifiers for the U-17 World Cup. It was one of the talents that allowed the star player of the Korean national team, Park Sung-gyu, to flourish after all. Back then it had intrigued him, but since he didn't have any use of it due to the presence of a similar skill, he abandoned it. But it was a different case right now. With the presence of the feature fusion, he could fuse it with his skill Lightning Steps. Chapter 4:14 Talent Chosen. Before deciding to scrap it, he carefully thought for a while, weighing its pros and cons. The benefits were great, but yet he couldn't decide easily. So, he didn't fully abandon it and instead put it on hold. I'll get back to it later. But for now, let's look at other options he thought as he moved ahead with his task at hand. After all, he was in no rush to decide. Clinical Finishing S enhances goal-scoring efficiency, might allow the user to enter a zone like state when in a pinch. He already had a talent that provided a boost to his attacking stat. So, initially while going through its title, he was about to ignore it. But as he went through its description, his perspective shifted slightly. Especially the thing regarding the zone, like state, intrigued him. Entering the state of flow is not something that anybody could achieve. And, though it didn't guarantee to allow him to enter the state of flow, it increased his probability. Even if it was by 0.1%, it still made a huge difference. Who knows, he might activate it in some crucial match. So, it got him into some deep thought as he paused to evaluate its benefits. Flow, huh? It'd come in handy if I could use it in big matches. And it also stated that it might trigger the flow like state if he were to be in a pinch. Although I don't know how much it'd increase my chances of triggering it, it's still worth a shot, he analyzed. By far it was the talent that intrigued him the most. Still, he decided to put it aside before making his final decision. After all, there were still more options left to be explored. Then he shifted his attention to the other remaining talents. All those other remaining options were quite lucrative as well, which made it even more difficult for him to make his choice. Apart from a few, every other talent charmed him. Yet, he only had one choice. So, he got a little frustrated while trying to choose. Arg, why do I have to choose only one? He grunted, feeling frustrated. Then again, he released a deep breath as he consoled himself. At least I have the opportunity to choose. Some people would train their whole life to unlock one talent. But here, I've got the opportunity to copy the talent of others and make it mine easily. Finally, after some more deep thinking, he made his choice. Though it still pained his heart a little while making the choice, he still had to choose one. I won't have any use of leadership right now, so I'll pass on it. As for injury resistance, I definitely need it. But it only slightly increases my chances of avoiding an injury. If only it were even more lucrative or its grade were higher, I'd have chosen it. But then again, it's not of the highest grade and it can't be upgraded as well. So I'll pass it as well. Phantom Steps, I have to pair it with Lightning Steps, so yeah, I'll pass it as well. Then that leaves me with only one option, Clinical Finishing. I'll bet on that slim chance of triggering the state of flow. I'm sure it'd come in handy, since I'll be facing a lot of tougher opponents from now on. After much contemplation, he finally made his decision. Though he hated to gamble, he chose to bet on the talent of Clinical Finishing for the slim opportunity that enabled him to enter a flow-like state. The state of flow is much more beneficial than any temporary boost. One might be capable of doing the impossible stuff when they are in a state of flow. Not only would it boost his one particular stat, but it'd instead boost his entire stats. Already experiencing such a state, he knew how enormous its benefits were. So after much careful consideration, he chose it. Are you sure you want to select clinical finishing as your reward? The system inquired as he made his decision. Didn't you see me contemplating? Why would I pick it if I were not sure? Hiro thought, clearly annoyed by the system's inquiry. The system could only read the thoughts he allowed it to read. So, it didn't hear what he thought of the system's inquiry. Yes, I'm sure, he made it clear. Command received. Initializing the process. Copying talent clinical finishing S. Please wait for a while. 1%, 2%, 3%. 96%, 97%, 98%, 100%. Congratulations, you've successfully copied the talent. Upon hearing the message of the system, he leaned back against the seat. The task, although simple, was rather tiring. So, he felt a little relieved. I can't wait to test it out in a match, he thought, excited to try his newly acquired talent. But just when he was getting all excited to try out his newly acquired talent, he startlingly jerked his upper body as he heard something. To fully familiarize the talent, the host needs to achieve certain targets. What? He blurted as he heard the message of the system. For a while, he seemed to have forgotten that he wasn't alone, but rather he was in the presence of other people. If they were to hear him speak in such a way, they'd probably think of him as some kind of lunatic. Immediately, he shut his mouth as he suspiciously checked around him if anybody had heard him. Fortunately enough, nobody seemed to have noticed his sudden outburst, which calmed him a little. But the irritation from the message of the system was still evident on his flustered face. It never happened previously, so why now all of a sudden? Hiro couldn't help but wonder why all of a sudden the system presented him with requirements to fully familiarize himself with the copied talent. But as usual, the system gave him robotic answers, devoid of any feelings. The talent is of a high level, so the host is required to meet the criteria to fully familiarize himself with the copied talent. There are no such requirements when I acquired the talent ambipedal, even though it's of the same grade. He questioned as he felt it really unfair to fulfill requirements all of a sudden. Some talents require some conditions to be met to use. The system answered, cutting him short. It didn't make any sense to him, and it felt truly illogical to him. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to ask further. He knew that no matter how much he whined, he'd get the same robotic response devoid of any emotions. In the first place, the very existence of the system was illogical, something straight out of fantasy novel. So, if there were some requirements to be able to use the talent, then he could only obediently try to fulfill them. There was nothing he could do. He was utterly helpless. Submitting to his ridiculous situation, he then proceeded further with the requirement of the system to be able to use his newly acquired talent. 1. The host needs to take 100 shots inside the box in a real match. 2. The host needs to take 100 shots daily until he completes the first requirement. So, I need to take 100 shots every day until I complete 100 real match shots, huh? Since it didn't tell me that I'd have to complete all those 100 shots in one match, then it must mean that I can complete it in as many matches as I can. Well, it'd be ridiculous if I had to take 100 shots in one match after all, he ridiculed himself. Registering 100 shots in a real match, it's almost near to impossible task. After all, let alone a single player, even a team wouldn't be able to register more than 20 shots in a match. From the looks of it, it would take him almost 20 or so matches to complete the first requirement, which meant it'd take him more than 3 months to be able to use his newly acquired talent. But he didn't seem discouraged even in the slightest. Instead, he appeared to be already thinking about ways to complete the quest as early as possible. Since it mentioned only shots, even the shots that aren't on target would count. That means if I'll at least register 10 shots in every single match, I'd be able to complete it in 10 matches, he figured. It eased his worries a little, but just when he was starting to rejoice, he remembered about the second requirement, 100 shots each day. Damn, on top of all that training from the club, now I'd even have to shoot 100 shots every day, he sighed as he thought about the hell he was about to suffer. But wait, aren't I forgetting something? He felt as if he was forgetting something. Don't I shoot more than 100 shots each day already? Exactly. Even without intentionally trying to shoot more than 100 shots, he was already shooting more than 100 times in training alone. All those frustrations had gotten into his head, making him forget something so simple. Chapter 4:15, A Place Called Home. Upon reaching his room, firstly, he offloaded his luggage and turned on the lights. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of his new space. It hadn't been long since he moved into this room, so it still bore an air of unfamiliarity to him. The room was mostly empty, sparsely furnished with just a bed, a closet, and a study table. The walls were painted a bright blue, the color lending a cheerful and calming aura to the space. Despite its simplicity, the room felt welcoming. The cozy red carpet on the floor contrasted nicely with the blue walls, adding a touch of warmth and homeliness. Overall, it was a small comfort, a piece of personal space in an otherwise hectic life. Then he walked to his bed and tossed himself on his bed. Lying on the bed with his face facing the ceiling, he took a deep breath, reminiscing the day's events. He had finally made his debut. Not only that, he even managed to score a goal on his debut. And the trophy of the Imodium was like a cherry on top. It still feels like a dream, he murmured as he recalled the day's events. Just a moment ago, he was surrounded by thousands of fans, scoring goals against teams he could only dream about playing previously. And now he was all alone in his room. He could still audibly hear the noise circulating in the stadium, and he could even vividly recall the scene at the stadium. But as he remained idle in his silent room, it almost felt as if he were dreaming. For a while, he continued to lay idle. I should probably sort things out, he mumbled as he started feeling a little drowsy. His eyelids were starting to get heavy, and his consciousness was also starting to dwindle. He knew that if he continued to lie down, he'd eventually fall asleep. After all, it was only natural for him to fall asleep after such a hectic day. But he still had some things left to do before falling asleep. So, despite the evident feeling of sleepiness, he forced himself to stay awake. Then he got out of his bed and opened his bag. Taking out his first ever Imodium trophy, he carefully placed it on the table. Then he took his jersey out and carefully hung it in the closet. He was planning to get it framed as a memento. Now, he could fall asleep if he wanted to, but something caught his eye when he was about to put his bag away. Walking to his study table, he picked a framed photo, one dating back to his elementary school years. Though he hadn't had the time to add new things to his room, he had added some personal touches to the room to make the room feel more like home. A framed photo of his family sat on the study table, alongside a photo of his elementary school teammates and his youth club teammates. Those pictures were a reminder of the people who believed in him and supported his dreams. Even though they had shared memorable moments on and off the pitch, he had already lost touch with many of them. And though once they had shared and fought for the same dream, many had already quit, while many were still fighting for their dreams. Only a few had managed to realize it, and he was fortunate enough to be one of those few. If it were his previous self, then he'd have already become content with what he had achieved. But this time was different. Making it professional wasn't his only goal. Rather, it was just the beginning of his much grander objective. His ultimate goal was to lift the World Cup with his nation. So, how could he be satisfied with just making it to pro? Well, if it were his previous self, then it'd have been a different case. But now he could dream more, dream grand. And he had the means to fulfill his grand dream. I can't worry about those who have already chosen to give up on their dreams, he said as he tried to alleviate this heavy feeling he was feeling when looking at the picture frame of his teammates. He felt sad for those who couldn't continue playing, but he knew that he didn't have any luxury to worry about others when he had a dream to chase. During his journey, he'll encounter many more people like them whose goals and dreams would align with his. But not every single one of their dreams would get fulfilled. Who knows, even his might not get fulfilled. He pitied them, but he couldn't bring himself to get angry at them for choosing to give up on their dreams. Neither could he ridicule them for their choices. After all, they hadn't made the choices because they liked it, but rather the situation had forced them to give up on their dreams. His eyes flashed with determination as he said, "Though many of you couldn't fulfill your dreams, you don't need to worry. I'll carry your will and fulfill it for you." It was the only thing he could do at the moment, and for sure many of them might not share the same feelings. If possible, they'd like to chase their dream on their own rather than relying on someone else to fulfill it. By saying so, he was only trying to console himself. Then he put down the picture frame in its original place and headed to his bed. That picture evoked some nostalgia, which made him recall his earlier days. Even with his eyes closed, he could only think of those moments. Thinking about those moments made him realize how far he had come. From winning national champions to winning the Takamoto Cup to now making his professional debut. He really had come so far. Along the way, he made some valuable friends, suffered heartbreaking defeats, and experienced the sweetness of victory. It had been nothing but blissful, and yet there was more to come, which made him excited about the future. Chapter 416, Training begins. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground as Hiro arrived. Apart from him, nobody had made it to the training ground, and from the looks of it, he appeared to be the first one to reach the pitch. Yesterday, he fell asleep while thinking about his past and future, but despite the exhaustion from the match, out of habit, he had awoken quite early in the morning. There was still plenty of time remaining for the morning training session to begin, but having nothing better to do, he still decided to leave for the pitch. This act of his would probably affect his relationship with his teammates, as they'd think that he was trying to show off by arriving earlier than anyone else. After all, when an individual sticks out from the herd, they're bound to face some backlash from the other members of the herd. Worst, he might get bullied for his actions. Even so, he couldn't just stay home and do nothing. So, now having arrived so early, he was the only one present on the pitch, and it'd be a while before anybody would show up. "Seems like I'm the only one at the pitch right now." He broke into a subtle chuckle as he wandered his eyes around the pitch. The grass, still a little damp with dew, glistened under the glowing light. The distant chirps of the birds only made it even more soothing. Relishing this serene atmosphere, he inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air. Excited, he then began his warm-up routine. Methodically stretching and jogging around the field, he warmed up his body before picking up the ball. "I should probably complete those 100 shots first. Before proceeding with other training, he thought of completing the requirement given by the system first. Perspiration trickled down his forehead as he continued to shoot. Since the system didn't mention any specific way of fulfilling the requirement, he could have just proceeded with normal shots from outside the box. But it didn't sit right with him. So, he intentionally made it even more challenging for him. By visualizing the toughest opponents he had faced up to date, he purposefully made the training even more difficult. Twisting and turning, he dribbled the ball around the field. Just like this, not only did he train his shooting, but he also trained his dribbling too. And as he continued to train, he noticed the first signs of life stirring at the training ground. The soft hum of a car engine reached his ears, and soon, other players began to trickle in. Most of their movements were rather slower, and only some looked as if they had rested well. Many made their way to the pitch, complaining about the training. "Why do we have to train so early in the morning right after a match? Yeah, we could just train in the evening, can't we?" Then, as they walked onto the field, they noticed the sight of Hiro drenched in sweat. Even without asking, they could tell that he had been on the pitch for quite a while by now. "Whoa, look at his training so early in the morning. I wish I could be young again." As they walked closer, they greeted him. Some even asked him to keep his arrival a secret from the coaches so that they won't pester them to arrive so early in the training too. If not for his previous performance, he might have gotten a different response. But due to his previous performance, nobody thought negative of his actions. Instead, many joked while many praised his work ethic and professionalism. Some even advised him on his techniques while some taught him new things. And as more and more players joined him on the field, the once silent pitch became noisy. Coach Tatsuya arrived shortly after. Upon his arrival, Other players became less noisy as they stopped their idle chatters and complaints. They became more diligent with their drills. For a while, he let them be as he continued to scan the field. His gaze landed on Hiro, who was already deep into his training. A faint smile crossed his lips as he looked at him. Though he might not have been on the field, he knew about Hiro's early arrival. Having such a dedicated player on his team made him feel quite ecstatic, but he couldn't allow himself to show his ecstasy. So, he maintained a rather solemn look on his face, although his eyes, which were glistening with pride and approval, said otherwise. Most of the young players who experience success so early in their life tend to be rather arrogant. But Hiro's attitude said otherwise. Not only was he talented, but he was also dedicated. Just from his actions alone, he could tell that he was different. For a while, he continued to observe Hiro. "All right, everyone, gather around," Coach Tatsuya called out, his voice firm yet encouraging. "I know yesterday was tough, but today is a new day. We have work to do, and I want to see the same level of effort and commitment that you showed in the match." No sooner had players heard his voice than they immediately hurried to the coach. Forming a circle around Coach Tatsuya, they lined up, awaiting his orders. Hiro, too, stood among them, glimmering with a sense of pride and responsibility. It wasn't his first training session with the team. He had already trained once with them, but it was his first time training with them after sharing a moment together on the field. After his previous performance, they no longer looked at him the way they looked at him when he arrived here for the first time. At first, many of them looked at him with eyes full of suspicion, while many looked at him with mockery. But now he had managed to change those gazes with his performance. He knew that his actions could inspire his teammates, and he was ready to give his all, both for himself and for the team. Chapter 4: 17 Bonding. As the training session began in earnest, the atmosphere shifted from one of fatigue to one of focus and resolve. The players pushed through their soreness, driven by the desire to improve and succeed. Despite consuming so much of his energy, Hiro continued to give his all. Leading by example, he poured every ounce of energy into his performance, leaving no room for error or complaints. And the way he devoted himself made it seem almost as if he had an infinite reserve of energy. Both his work ethic and enthusiasm were rather contagious. Not only did it influence his peers by arousing their competitive spirit, but also influenced the coaching staff, making them even more enthusiastic about the session. The training ground, once quiet and still, was now alive with the sounds of effort and determination. While they marched on the field, the sun kept climbing high up in the sky, and by the time their training session came to an end, it was already 10 in the morning. Beep! The shrill sound of the whistle tore through the air, causing the players to cease their actions on the field, signaling the end of the session. The training had been nothing but intense, and the sheer intensity of the training was evident on their exhausted faces. The training had left them gasping for breath. Panting heavily as they ceased their movement, many of them collapsed on the field, while some stripped their sweat-soaked jerseys to cool themselves. Hiro, on the other hand, tried to stabilize his breathing. Though it drained him, yet still it felt quite rejuvenating. "Good work, everybody. You all have worked really hard today. Keep it up," Coach Tatsuya commended, applauding his players for their tenacity and dedication. "I'll meet you all in the canteen." With that, Tatsuya left the pitch before others while discussing some tactics with his peers. "Thank you for your hard work," the players responded in unison, their voices full of vigor. Even after the departure of the coaches, Hiro stayed put on the pitch for some while, attempting to bond with other players. He knew that performing well in matches wasn't enough. Building strong relationships with his fellow players was equally crucial for success. "Little guy, I'm expecting your reply to my post." Asai Miura, one of the veteran players of the team, who was well over 30, spoke in a friendly manner. At well over 30, Asahi was a pillar of experience and skill in the team. His tall, muscular frame and sharp eyes exuded confidence and determination, while his graying hair and lined face told stories of countless battles on the pitch. Asahi was not just a player, but a legend in the league. His achievements were remarkable: a 4-time league champion and a 2-time MVP of the league, and despite playing as a midfielder, he had been the top scorer of the league for 2 consecutive times during his prime. His presence on the field was commanding, and his knack for reading the game made him an invaluable asset to the team. And for that reason, even though he didn't move as much as others, he was still valuable for the team. It's not that he hadn't received any offers from overseas. During his prime, he was even linked with one of the powerhouse teams in Germany, Borussia Dortmund. It was rumored that they wanted to bring him to their ranks. Though later he denied those claims of Dortmund trying to recruit him, so nobody knows whether it's just a rumor or truth. Surprisingly, just at the moment when those rumors were circulating, he had injured himself. At that time, he had been out of action for almost half the season due to his injury. So, even though he had denied those claims, it remains a matter of debate whether he was approached for real or not. Hiro looked up, smiling at Asahi. Of course, Asahi-san. I'll get to it right after this. Asahi chuckled, clapping Hiro on the shoulder. Good. You got a promise, kid. Keep pushing, and you'll go far. Hiro nodded, appreciating his compliment. I'll do my best to live up to not disappoint you. Good. Asahi laughed. You should visit us sometime. You know my daughter is a huge fan of yours. Asahi's daughter was only a year younger than him, so he felt a little hesitant to respond. Even though Asahi was acting friendly, he knew that if he said anything wrong, he wouldn't let him go. After all, it was a well-known fact in the team that he was overprotective of his daughter. Who knows what he'd do to him if he said something wrong? Even without looking at him, Hiro could tell that he was intently staring at him, waiting to lash out. Since he mentioned it, he could tell that his words were true. But he also knew that he was testing him by mentioning his daughter's name. This made him quite nervous. Helplessly, he looked in the direction of Tatsuki and Naoto to bring him out of this situation. But just as he looked in their direction, both of them avoided his gaze. It was as if they were telling him to handle his situation by himself. Since they decided to abandon him, now he had to handle this situation all by himself. One wrong word and he might get his head chopped. Thank you for the invitation, Asahi-san. I'll definitely try to visit you in my free time, Hiro replied politely. As for his daughter, he didn't even mention it. He deduced that it'd be better to ignore his daughter so that he wouldn't get any reason to pour on him. His response left no room for Asahi to lash out. You've said it. So, do visit when you've got time, Asahi replied. Also, I've followed you on Insta. Be sure to follow back, he added. Hiro nodded his head. I will. They weren't aware that he had 2 separate accounts. So, he knew that Asahi must have followed him in his other account, which was meant for the public. It had been quite a lot since he last opened his account. Chapter 4:18 Open Shower. Hiro made full use of this opportunity to try to bond with his fellow teammates. Especially his bond with the veteran Asahi deepened even more after that short conversation. Then after a while, players began to disperse, heading toward the canteen for a well-deserved meal. Hiro, however, lingered for a while more on the pitch. He took his moment to absorb the scene. The bright blue sky above, the smell of the freshly cut grass, and the distant hum of the players. It was moments like these that reminded him why he loved the game so much. While enjoying this peaceful moment, a sudden feeling of nostalgia struck him. I hope you're doing fine, Shun, he mumbled as he thought of the moment when he used to train alongside Shun and others. It wasn't just Shun. He thought of others too who had gone out to chase their dreams. He'd only be heartless if he didn't even think of them after spending so much time with them. Just hang in there, guys, he whispered, shifting his focus back to the present. Walking slowly, Hiro then headed toward the canteen while reflecting on what he had been through. The intensity, the camaraderie, the encouragement from the coach and the senior players, he could vividly recall it. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but with teammates like Asahi and a supportive coaching staff, he felt ready to face any challenge. Considering my previous performance, I'd probably get some playing minutes in the next game. But what would I do after Eriksson recovers, he pondered. He had only started, but after his impressive debut, he was sure that he'd get some playing minutes in the next game too. However, he worried about his future once Eriksson, the established star of the team, returned. His position clashed with Eriksson, and it was a known fact that Eriksson, who had already established himself on the team, would get priority over him. But he didn't want to sit out or play as a substitute just because of him. He wanted to start. Just playing as a reserve player wouldn't satiate him. After all, he had a much grander goal to achieve. There was also a possibility of changing the formation to fit in two attacking midfielders. But considering the core philosophy of the team, it was rather doubtful. To play in two attacking midfielders, they'd require another midfielder capable of retaining the ball and who's equally good in offense and defense. However, after going through the list of available players on the roster, he knew that they didn't possess anyone of such caliber, which meant that they could only try to bolster that position in the transfer window. But there was still much time left for the transfer window to open again. I won't back down no matter what. Hiro's eyes flashed with determination. There was no point in thinking about this matter. Tactical decisions were all up to the coaching staff after all. Though he couldn't influence their decision directly, it didn't mean that he couldn't do it indirectly. As long as he performs well, they'd be forced to put him on the team, even if it meant choosing him over their star player Eriksson. And he was here to become the best. So to be the best, he'd have to beat the best. In the canteen, the atmosphere was relaxed. A stark contrast to their previous self. All of them appeared thoroughly cleaned and refreshed. But their numbers appeared rather incomplete. He paused as he remembered something. How could I forget to hit the showers? All those thinking had made him forget about hitting the shower first before heading to the canteen. How could he eat with his sweaty and dirty body? The stained marks from a moment ago were still evident on his face and jersey, and he also reeked of sweat. Then he headed to the shower to get cleaned before heading back to the canteen to eat. Arriving at the shower, he was met with the sight of men wandering around the shower, naked. It was an open shower, and it wasn't his first time here either. Though it wasn't his first time here, he still couldn't use to such a sight. But what was there to get embarrassed? Although still a boy on the outside, he was way older than anybody present here if he added the years from his previous life. Yet when he looked at some of the players with big guns, he couldn't help but feel insecure about his little thing. Being born as a man, comparison was unavoidable, especially when he compared his thing with the foreign players. It'd leave him devastated and ashamed. What's there to fuss about, he thought as he looked at his thing down there, appearing rather worked up. I still have time to grow. Even though he said those words to console himself, he knew that even if he did have more time to grow, his thing would never surpass those foreigners, which made him feel slightly gloomy. Just at this moment, when he was showing a plethora of emotions, one of the foreign players of the squad approached him. It was Ricardo, one of the Brazilian players on the team. Robustly built, he had a rather muscular body. And even down there, he was damn impressive. Kid, your skills are that of a Brazilian. But Ricardo paused as he disappointingly lowered his head. Even without him mentioning it, he knew what he was about to say, but he didn't want to hear it. But accept that little thing of yours. Sigh. Ricardo sighed as he completed his sentence, mocking Hiro's libido. Hearing his comment, anger boiled inside him like bubbling tar. His face turned red with anger. Yet, he somehow refrained from lashing out. I still have room to grow, Ricardo-san, he replied politely, maintaining his composure to the best of his ability. After spending more than 4 years in Japan, Ricardo's Japanese was almost perfect, except for his accent, which made him sound different. And for obvious reasons, when he said those words full of mockery, it struck a nerve. Chapter 4:19 Outrage. The sky, painted with shades of orange and pink, slowly darkened, signaling the end of the day. But for Shun, who had remained on the pitch, long after his teammates had left, it was far from over. His eyes could barely see the ball, yet he continued to train his reflexes. In front of him, the automatic ball launcher shot multiple shots in his direction, rapidly forcing him to make repeated saves without any rest. If he delayed, even for a moment, he'd miss the ball. He wasn't competing against anybody. So, one may wonder why he was so caught up in trying to save almost every shot. Though he wasn't competing against anybody, it didn't mean that he wasn't competing at all. His competition was with none other than himself. As he continued to make saves, sweat poured down his face, glistening in the fading light. His breathing continued to get heavier, yet he refused to stop. Pushing his limits, despite the evident exhaustion, he continued to make saves. Each dive, each jump, and each catch was an attempt to push his limits, to become better, faster, and more reliable. His unwavering determination was evident in his eyes. I need to catch up soon, he mumbled with great difficulty, gasping heavily as he finally paused after the machine ran out of balls to shoot at him. Just like most of his teammates, he too had seen Hiro's performance, and he did feel happy for him, but it also left a bad taste in his mouth. The two had shared the same field for many years, and he had even left the academy earlier than him. But unlike him, he hadn't managed to achieve any real-time success. Instead, he had been loaned out to free up the roster. No, he wasn't envious of Hiro. Though he hadn't imagined him to make such a grand debut, he always believed that he'd do well even if the stage were to change. The stage might change, but his quality would remain the same. However, it didn't feel good either. He was furious, but his fury wasn't directed at anyone else but himself. Even when he'd been loaned out, he didn't feel even a bit enraged. Instead, he was happy to finally get some playing minutes. After all, he didn't get much opportunity in the team because of the presence of Naoto. So, he was really happy to be loaned out. The team he was loaned out belonged to the second division. It was a team called Yokohama FC. No, it's not a subsidiary team associated with the first division team with almost the same name, Yokohama FM. It's an entirely different team who were pushing for the first division. The previous season, he had nearly managed to lead them to the promotion, securing a spot for the playoffs. They had placed 5th in the previous season. The top 2 teams of the league get directly promoted to the first division, while the teams placing 3rd to 6th battle against each other in playoffs for an opportunity to secure the promotion. However, even after the playoffs, the winning team needs to face the 16th place team from the first division to actually get promoted to the first division. And almost most of the time, even after winning the playoffs, the team from the second division would end up losing against the 16th place team of the first division. So, apart from the top 2 teams of the league, the opportunity for promotion was rather slim for the rest of the teams fighting for the promotion. Precisely because of his performance, he had gone soft. Though even after his marvelous performance, he still failed to get a shot at his parent club. And this season again, he had returned back to the same club. It's not that he didn't get other offers, but having spent a season already, it didn't feel like moving to an entirely different team. It was because of the sense of familiarity and the feeling of importance that had brought him again to this club. This season, too, his performance had been nothing but marvelous. As of now, they were placed 3rd in the league, and if they continued their momentum, they could even aim for direct promotion. The feeling of importance, the feeling of others relying on him had gotten to his head, making him forget his goals. He had become lax. His spot on the team was guaranteed, and there was nobody to challenge him for his spot. Even if he did make a few errors, nobody would criticize him, which only added to his already comfort. And when you get too comfortable, you lose sight of your goals. Only those who can step out of their comfort zone can improve. Feeling frustrated at himself for his attitude, Shun pounded his punch on the ground as he remained flat against his face facing the sky. Unbeknownst to Shun, his coach, Nakamura, stood silently at the edge of the training ground, observing him with a mixture of pride and concern. Nakamura had finished his own work for the day, but on his way home, he had noticed Shun's continued presence on the field. It was way past the training time, but despite noticing his presence on the field, instead of calling out to him, he chose to watch from the shadows, silently observing and analyzing him. Shun's dedication was evident, and it struck a chord with Nakamura. Just like him, once he too was like that, staying up late in the field driven by a desire to improve. Watching him train felt rather nostalgic as he remembered his younger days, which is why he didn't intervene. Sure, hard work was important, but so was rest. Training tirelessly while ignoring rest would only ruin a player's career, and he was well aware of it. But still, he couldn't bring himself to tell Shun to stop. How could he do it after seeing such determination in his eyes? So despite his understanding, he stood on the sidelines, waiting for him to finish his training. It was the only approach he could take right now. He felt so. The pressure that Shun was putting on himself, he knew that it was a double-edged sword. Nakamura could see that Shun was not just training hard. He was fighting against the weight of his own expectations and fears of inadequacy. He knew that Shun was fairly talented, and his dedication was also great. Having coached him for more than a season, he was aware of his personality and traits. And he also believed that if his progression remained steady, one day he'd make it. But watching him train to the point of falling apart today made him slightly worried. Finally, as Shun collapsed on the floor and remained idle for a while, he decided it was time to step in. He approached the goal quietly, his gaze filled with concern fixated on Shun. "Shun," he called out softly. Startled, Shun turned to see his coach standing in front of him with a thoughtful expression on his face. He shouldn't be here at the moment. So what's he doing here? Is he here to reprimand me? I've breached the curfew. Several thoughts appeared in his mind as he noticed his coach's presence. Coach Nakamura had implemented a strict set of rules to maintain discipline in the squad. One of those rules was the implementation of a curfew. After the end of the training, players were required to leave the premises and prioritize recovery. Having ended his career early due to his recklessness, he had especially reminded them to be mindful of this rule. Everyone knew that it was for their sake that he had implemented such a rule. After all, as much as training is important, recovery is equally important as well. Not only does resting well allow their fatigued muscles proper time to recover, but it also keeps them sharp. Fearing the wrath of his manager, Shun said, "Coach Nakamura." He paused for a while, trying to catch his breath, and added, "I didn't see you there." It's not what he wanted to say, but it was all that he could muster right now. Nakamura walked closer, wearing a solemn look on his face. But the more he got closer, the more his heart thumped. Perspiration trickled down his face, and he started feeling a little tense, as if his shoulder were starting to stiffen. "You won't let me?" he thought, scared. Contrary to his expectation, Nakamura then placed his hands atop his shoulder. "I've been watching you for a while. Your dedication is impressive, but remember, improvement isn't just about how much time you spend on the field. It's also about how you use that time." It wasn't what he was expecting. In fact, he was preparing to face his wrath and his punishment. But those words left him utterly speechless. He had broken the rule, but yet instead of getting angry at him, his coach was trying to console him. For some reason, his words made him feel extremely guilty. Chapter 4:20 The Road. Upon hearing his coach's words, he looked down, trying to avoid his gaze. But he couldn't pretend not to hear him. Coach Nakamura was present right before him, expecting an answer from him, and it would only appear as if he were fleeing had he chosen to remain silent. A mixture of embarrassment and guilt flashed in his eyes as he tried to speak his heart. "I just want to get better, coach. I feel like I need to do more." He was well aware that he had breached the rule, and he shouldn't be saying such stuff right now. Instead, he should be apologizing. But yet, he couldn't bring himself to apologize either. He felt as if he had to offload these unsettling feelings off his heart. "I understand," Nakamura replied gently. "But sometimes, less is more. Pushing yourself too hard can lead to burnout or injury. You need to find a balance. Trust in the training sessions, and trust in yourself." Nakamura could clearly see the conflict in his eyes, his resolve to improve, and his fury at himself. But he knew that hastiness wasn't the answer to his problems. After all, improvement takes time and dedication. Just by pushing your limits one day in the gym, you won't see any results. And even if one were to push past their limits on a daily basis, it's not guaranteed that one might actually get better. People require rest to function. Especially for athletes, it's even more true. Since they engage in physical exercises, they need even more rest than normal people for their muscles to recover. Overworking oneself would only increase the chances of injury. Even famous players like Cristiano Ronaldo, who spends most of his time training, put rest in their major priority. They know that as much as training is important, recovery is equally important. Many people assume that by working more, you achieve more. But it's not entirely true. When putting the right effort into the right thing, one can improve more than the one who mindlessly works hard. And right now, he was doing the exact same thing. Driven by his fury at himself, He was overworking his already tired body to improve. It was unlikely to happen. They had a match tomorrow, and now, due to his recklessness, instead of doing him good, he had tired himself. In his present condition, he was unlikely to be in a perfect condition in tomorrow's match. And, for sure, if he were to start in such a condition, mistakes were inevitable. Shun then nodded, taking in his coach's words. He respected Nakamura immensely and knew he was right. "I'll try, coach," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Nakamura gave him an encouraging smile. "Good. Now let's call it a day. You've done enough for tonight. Go home, rest, and come back fresh tomorrow." Before they could walk out of the field, he felt an intense urge to speak something. Though his heart hesitated to say it, he couldn't bring himself to keep it either. "About tomorrow's match. I think it's only fair for you to bench me. I think I deserve it." Shun spoke with great difficulty, and Nakamura could very well feel the difficulty. It was a sign that he was maturing. It was a sign that he was guilty for his actions. And it was a sign that he was trying to own up to his actions. This gesture of Shun brought a smile to his face. His lips curled into a smile, and his eyes glistened as he got washed by an intense feeling of joy and pride. To be part of his player's improvement, what more could a coach desire? He wanted to praise Shun, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He feared that it'd hinder his path of improvement, so he kept it to himself. "Rest well," he replied briefly in his usual tone. "Yes, sir," Shun responded, his voice full of vigor. "Then I'll clear up this mess first before heading home," he added. The balls were scattered all over the ground, and so were the equipment. So it was only natural for him to clear up his mess, since it was he who caused this mess in the first place. But just as he was about to head away to collect the balls, Coach Nakamura prevented him. "Go and get the net. 2 hands are better than 1 inch." Coach Nakamura was offering to help him clean up this mess. So, how could he refuse it? And as he said, it'd be quicker with the 2 of them instead of him doing everything alone. For reasons like this, why he respected Coach Nakamura. Though he appeared stern from the outside, he was really a comfortable person to be with. "Make sure to catch well," Nakamura added as Shun was about to leave. Then while Shun grabbed the net, Nakamura began to shoot the scattered balls in his direction, one by one. His shots were quite precise, showing his quality as a player. Even though it had been quite a long since he hung his boots, he hadn't rusted. It was as if he were taking free kicks during his time as a player. And Shun, who was on the receiving end, could vividly feel the weight behind those shots. Once a player, always a player, he thought as he caught the balls in the net without missing any. With the 2 of them working together, they quickly managed to clean up the pitch. Then after collecting everything, they walked out of the field together. As they walked off the field together, the last light of the evening faded into the night. The training ground, once filled with the sounds of effort and determination, now fell silent. While getting off the field, Shun glanced back at the goal one last time. And as he glanced back, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude for his coach's guidance. Just as Coach Nakamura had said, the road to improvement was long and arduous.